Hey guys, welcome my dear followers. Thank you so much for all the support during the first season of this fanfic. So, today I'm here to bring you the second season of What If Naruto Was a Prodigy and Was Abandoned by His Family. If you want the next season of these fanfics, leave me a like, comment and subscribe. So then, enjoy the fanfic.
Chapter 7. Again, sitting at the metal table, Ino waited for the guard to finish securing Naruto to his seat. When he finished, he removed the muzzle from around his mouth before shutting the door, leaving the two to their second session. Ino smiled softly at him. She was still a little uncomfortable, but at the very least she wasn't as nervous. Naruto was smiling at her in a fake expression of surprise. "You came back," he quipped with the idea to show her that he was unsure she would. Ino raised an eyebrow. "I told you I would." Did he really think she wouldn't? "Oh yes, but many people have told me that." Ino nodded. "I'm sure. But I meant it." He smiled at her as she began flipping through her notepad. "So what's on the agenda today?" he asked her. "Just a few questions." Ino answered, reading a few lines. It was time for her to get a gauge on how this apparent psychosis affected him physically. "How are your dreams? Deep, dark, and viciously intoxicating?" He answered instantly. She gave him a confused expression. "Would you care to elaborate?" Naruto sighed and looked up at the ceiling. "Well, there's not much to say. It's pretty self-explanatory," he said. "They are darker than most people would prefer. A little more nightmarish if you could see that." "So, nightmares?" she asked him. Naruto chuckled. "If you'd prefer that, then I suppose." He nodded. Ino nodded back, jotting a few notes down on the notepad. "Do these nightmares have any specific pattern or theme?" she asked. "No, I can't say they do." She nodded again and wrote more down. "Well, do you ever have happy dreams?" she asked him. Naruto chuckled. "Happy dreams?" he asked, putting emphasis on happy as if it were the most ridiculous word he's ever heard. "Is then an actual term?" he asked her. "What? Happiness?" she asked. He nodded in confirmation. "Well, of course it is." He smiled. "You seem so sure of that. What is happiness for you then?" Ino put her notepad down and tapped her pen on the desk in thought. "Happiness is doing the things you like to do with the people you enjoy being with," she said. "I'm not sure I understand that," he admitted. "Do you have an example?" She thought over it. Well, now that she was forced to think about it, she realized she really didn't do anything anymore that brought her joy. Ever since she began her psychiatric studies, she pretty much fell off of the social life she was accustomed to when she was younger. That day at the coffee shop with Sakura and Tenten was the first thing she had done with friends in years, but for some reason, she felt out of place. She felt different because of how shallow the conversation was. After so long of training with professionals whose job was to dig into deeper dialect, anything less was just rudimentary and agonizingly boring. She felt lost when talking to them of the simple things they were accustomed to. Talking of children and relationships and the normal gossip around the village, it was almost sickening that day, but she smiled through it nonetheless. Then, that same night at her parents' house, their conversation, aside from the argument, was shallow as well. Her mother, she understood, wouldn't have the mental prowess to delve into deeper conversation. But her father she expected more from. Problem is he still sees her as a child, not a practiced psychiatrist, so he has no interest in talking with her in that way. In her studying, she found that depth in discussion is what brought her joy. When she returned to her life, she realized how shallow her everyday life is. Even her previous two patients, who were seen as normal patients, were too shallow-minded for her to actually have a conversation with. The only time she truly got her fix was right here. She looked up at the redhead who smiled her way. They only just began their second session, and she realized he was the only person willing and able to bring about that feeling of happiness. She just realized how long she was taking to think over his question. She blinked away her thoughts. Well, like you and I are sessions," she said truthfully. "So, this psychotic battle of two insane minds?" he asked her with a grin. She was shocked by that. "You think I'm insane?" He smiled at her. "Of course I do. You, Miss Yamanaka, have an amazing mind. And everyone knows that all great minds have just a touch of madness," he explained. For inspiration, that's nice. She complimented his words. Is that an original? He chuckled. I wish. No, I read something similar before. Can't remember where. But it's true nonetheless. I suppose it's reasonable. She replied. Oh, it is. He said, wiggling in his seat. Miss Yamanaka? Ino looked at him in questioning. What would be your idea of a perfect world? He asked curiously. She was shocked by the sudden question and thought over her answer. A perfect world? She asked, giving herself more time. Naruto nodded. Well, a perfect world, in my opinion, would be a world with no wars, no fighting, no killing, just good people, I guess. She replied. He looked at her strangely. The last time you were here, we spoke about what makes one a bad person, and I'd like to think I gave you a new perspective on it, he said. But I'm curious now. In this perfect world of yours, what makes one a good person? He asked, putting her on the spot again. She had to think about it. Well, it would be a generally good person, she said, giving a basic answer. Yes, but what would qualify? I mean, in this fictitious world of yours, you said there would be just good people, he said, in a way mocking her word choice. She nodded her head, not fully understanding what he was trying to say. Yeah, so the people are just good people overall, she restated with a chuckle, not sure how else to put it. Redundant, but let me explain my take on what this so-called perfect world would be. Actually, I think we're close to it, he said. She gave him a confused look. The world right now? She asked in disbelief. He nodded his head. It's all about a simple concept of balance. You can't have this without that type of deal, he explained with a nod. No light without dark. No hot without cold. No good without bad, he said. How would that apply here? She asked. Well, think about it. What is a good man if he hasn't the option to be evil? There's a word for it, he said, nodding his head. Without the option to be evil, as is described in your impeccable world, a good person is just normal. And in a world with so many possibilities, normality is a sin. She nodded at the sound logic, but wasn't satisfied just yet. Normality, as you call it, is also safe, she replied. He grinned. In a life so short, safety is but a handicap. A mental blockade that is triggered when in the face of danger. A natural fear of death for these civilized people, which is kind of ironic if you think about it, he said. Ironic in what way? She asked, wanting a little insight. Well, he began. It's just ironic how these sane individuals are so afraid of death, and yet they live as if they are already there. She shook her head. I still don't follow. Naruto looked up in thought, trying to think of another way to put it. Well, think about fish in a stream, he said, nodding his head. Only the dead ones go with the flow. In a way, most of the people you see when you walk those village streets do the same thing almost absent-mindedly, as if they are already dead. So, you don't fear death? She asked him curiously. He tilted his head and eyed her strangely. How could I know? He asked. I haven't tried it. Ino chuckled at his joke. No, doctor, I do not fear death, because death is nothing more than the ending to suffering. In honesty, I'd welcome it. He continued, getting serious. Ino looked at him strangely. So, you want to die? No, 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 he said quickly. It's not a matter of being suicidal. No, it's just not wanting to live any longer. She was about to ask him what he meant by that, but he continued. I know how that sounds, but it's actually something completely different than what you'd expect. Suicide is described as taking your own life. That's not what I am looking to do. No, if death approaches me, I would welcome it. I do not plan on looking for it, he explained. Why is that? She asked. Do you feel none content with life? Naruto cringed at the question as if it slapped him in the face. No, you see, that, doctor, is the problem, he said. If you simply feel content with life, then you're not living. If all you feel is that mediocre sense of enjoyment with the life you are given, then you, ma'am, are as good as a dead fish. How do you cope with the horrible things that happen in your life? She asked in complete bewilderment. This wasn't a question on the agenda. She just really wanted to know. Especially in a place like this? Naruto smiled at the look of awe in her eyes, Whatever he was doing, it was working. Coping is of no issue. My mind is constantly changing and contorting in the most demented ways you could imagine. There are so many voices up here that life, and the things that happen usually slip my fragile mind. Ino's smile was wide and filled with astonishment. That sounds amazing. It definitely has its upsides, he said with a smile at her glossy-eyed stare. Ino smiled and leaned back in her seat, thinking over his words. Although it took her a second to process what he was saying half the time, when she did, she sort of agreed, and it assured her that talking to Naruto was the best conversation she had throughout her days as of recently. It was refreshing to be able to talk to someone on your level of thinking, or in this case, far surpass her own. This whole ordeal was going too smoothly for anything that happened with the past doctors to be true. From what she was experiencing, Naruto was nothing more than a deep thinker. Yeah, he had a twisted view on society and some psychopathic tendencies, but he wasn't dangerous. Or maybe she just hadn't seen the worst in him yet. 2 months later, I don't know, Menma. It didn't really work out the last time, Minato said, leaning back in his Hokage seat, staring over at his son dressed in his street clothes. Come on, Tsunade. That was 2 years ago, he argued. I just hate how incomplete the family feels, he said, looking down. Minato sighed. Believe me, I get it, he remarked. But digging all that up will upset your mother. She just got over the whole ordeal. Then don't tell her, he said, arguing his case. I just want to see him. I don't know. Maybe tell him about my family and all. I would have to talk to his new psychiatrist to see how he's been doing, Minato said while he simultaneously shook his head as if telling him it wouldn't happen. New psychiatrist? I thought he wasn't taking sessions anymore. Minato nodded. Well, he wasn't up until a few weeks ago. Apparently someone took his case. Well, do you know who it is? He asked. He shook his head. No, I haven't had a chance to go and check up on things in a while, he admitted. Last time was about 3 or 4 months ago and he was still on lockdown, so, well, if you hear anything then just let me know, he said, turning to leave before Minato called him back. Hey, hang on. About that other thing, well, everyone seems to be on board. Shouldn't take more than another few months, he said, bringing a smile to the younger man's face. Menma chuckled as he walked closer to the door. Just make sure that paperwork is done by then, old man. Minato chuckled and shook his head, ignoring the statement. Going back to his work, he thought over just how that conversation began. Basically, Menma wanted to visit Naruto before his daughter was born just to speak with him one last time. For what reason, he didn't know. It was a sudden request that he doubted would go over well but would entertain it at the least. Signing off on another document, there was a knock at his door. Come in, he called out, pushing the paper off to the side. Inochi walked in looking worse for wear. Bags under his eyes, slouched shoulders, and an expression so downtrodden that it'd be hard not to notice. Minato, hey, he called out to him lowly. Inochi, Minato said, looking him up and down, noticing his disgruntled state. You look rough, he chuckled and took a seat in a chair off to the side. Yeah, he said hollowly. Silence settled in for a second. So, how can I help you? Minato asked cautiously. Inochi sighed and thought about how he could answer that. Well, I have a request to make, he said, surprising him. Minato just waited for him to spit it out. I want you to, well, I just want you to think it over, he said. What is it? Minato questioned, not liking the direction this conversation was headed. Inochi stared out at the floor a few feet in front of him, deep in thought. He sighed a few times, finding this a lot harder than it seemed just a little while ago. What he was going to ask was something he himself wouldn't agree to if he were in the position. I want you to move Naruto back to the prison. Minato just stared at him in shock. What? He asked him. I want him moved back to the prison, he repeated as if he just hadn't heard him. Minato couldn't understand what was going on here. It didn't make any sense. Inochi, you don't even work there anymore, he said. I am aware of that, he said, nodding his head. Minato just shook his head, still trying to think of a plausible reason for why the man wanted to do this. To his knowledge, Inochi hasn't stepped foot in the asylum in years. So what was the meaning of this outrageous request? I don't understand. Minato, Inochi said, still looking out into the middle distance. I have not asked you for much in our long friendship. Now, I am begging you, please. Minato shook his head at the desperate statement. Inochi, you know I can't do that, he said, looking at him. Inochi shook his head. Naruto's not right in the head. If we put him back in the prison, he drawled off. He can't stay at the asylum. Inochi said. Minato still wasn't understanding. What brought this up? He wouldn't give an answer, he just shook his head again. He can't stay there. Minato sighed and stood to his feet. Look, come back in a few days, I'll have Ibiki here to explain his progress. We can make a decision then, he said. Inochi shook his head yet again and stood to his feet, heading for the door, not turning around on his way out. Minato sighed and rubbed his head at the confusing turn of events. Sitting in his room, reading book after book, Naruto thought about all that has happened. He thought about how close he was to freedom. He could just feel how devoted Ino was becoming. From their conversations, he could see how she was changing day by day. It was she who requested they have longer sessions every day without him even asking. He technically hadn't asked for anything she did for him. She just sort of did it. He told her how boring his days are and how he used to read all the time. She got him books. He told her how the straitjacket would sometimes hurt his arms. She demanded the guard remove it in place of simple handcuffs instead. He told her that he liked her hair down and she left it that way. It was simple things that made him realize that on a subliminal level, she was willing to do things for him, and the more he pushed, the more he could ask for. Their recent conversations were becoming more and more personal. They spoke of everything that could be discussed on an intellectual level, and she expressed to Naruto that these deep conversations they had were all she enjoyed anymore. Knowing that, he spent his days of isolation planning the next theory he could explain for her or debate about. It was something to do besides staring at his padded walls all day. He noticed the change in her. She was slowly becoming more cynical in her thinking, a little more dark in her humor when they joked around. He also noticed how flirty she seemed to turn when the time allowed it. It was strange at first, but she always passed it off as a joke afterwards, so it wasn't much to bite off of. Not that he couldn't exploit that. In the slight chance that those random outbursts of playful affections were real, he would flirt back in hopes of moving this whole ordeal along a little quicker. Ino was at the edge of the cliff with her feet dangling over the ocean of insanity. With a little shove, she would fall in. Naruto had a plan to get out of here, and she played a big role in it. He just had to bid his time. It wouldn't be too long now. At the home of soon-to-be parents, Sakura and Menma Namikaze, Ino sat at the dining room table looking in on the group of people that identified themselves as her friends. It was an impromptu party that Tenten came to her house to retrieve her for earlier this morning. She sat in the corner seat of the dining room, watching everyone talk amongst themselves about random topics that didn't mean much. It was boring her to death. Around her were Tenten and Sakura, both bragging about their respective husbands, or soon to be in Tenten's case. It was as if they were in competition with each other over who had the more supportive man. They droned on and on about which of them was more efficient in the aspects of a good partner, as if it mattered in the slightest. Ino just sat in her seat, drinking the bottle of sake in her hand. She looked around the room, viewing everyone in there in a new light. Her conversations with Naruto brought a twist to the reality she's come to know in her lifetime. The friends she saw on a daily basis were a lot different than she remembered them being. They were the same, she just didn't view them the same. The ones she saw as confident and a little brash were now blind and idiotic. The shy or quiet ones were more aware of what life is. Regardless, they were all foolish in their ways of thinking and understanding. She honestly felt superior to everybody there, even the ones who could most likely kick her ass. In a mental battle before, no one could hold a candle to her, besides Shikamaru, mainly because of her family's special jutsu. But now it was much more than that. It was strange how much she could feel herself change in just 2 months with the help of her red-headed patient. She felt like a completely different person. A good one or a bad, she didn't know yet. She knew she was changing though. As a psychiatrist, she was constantly keeping track of her own mental state as well, just out of habit. It was becoming so dark and twisted, and she knew it was. In a way, she felt like psychopathy was creeping up on her. She also knew the cause of it as well. Naruto was the root of her falling, but it was such an intoxicating feeling. It was like falling in love. A scary experience that she hoped had a happy ending. She was falling, down, deep in a hole. Wink asterisk, her mind was starting to go and she could feel it. Ino would have been alarmed had it not had such an enticing endpoint. Having the chance to think in the same way as Naruto was something she wanted. If that meant psychopathy, then she was up for it. Hopefully it didn't come to that. Waking from her thoughts, she noticed she was now sitting at the table by herself. Sakura and Tenten left to find their significant others, as did everyone else apparently. She spotted couple after couple smooched up together around the house. They all smiled and had their own little conversations, mocking her while she sat in her seat alone, wishing she had that. Who would she have that with? Everyone that liked her was a complete idiot or a conceited asshole. Everyone she liked was, well, she didn't really like anyone. To rephrase, she didn't really like anyone attainable for her. Ino wouldn't lie to herself. Naruto Namikaze had crept his way back into her heart with ease over their time together. It was like he never left. For the first time in a long time, she felt appreciated and needed. He spoke to her like she understood every word he said even when sometimes she didn't. He treated her like she was better than these simple-minded civilized people even when she wasn't. He made her feel like she could be more than what she already is. How could she not fall for that? Sadly, that wasn't the type of crush she could run around telling her friends and parents about. She'd be taken off the case instantly. Maybe this is what her father was worried about. Maybe he knew of Naruto's charm and took a guess at how it would affect her. It was more likely he feared the possibility of her ending up like Dr. Jaeger. It seemed like a plausible fear to have, of course, with the extensive list of suicide victims caused by Naruto's influence. More importantly, it showed that her own father didn't even believe in her. If he thought so little of her abilities that he didn't trust her to not kill herself because of something that a patient said, then what good was he as a father? Ino, she jumped in shock as Tenten sat down next to her, looking at her in curiosity. What? She asked in irritation. Tenten gave her an amused expression. Geez, a little moody, aren't we? Ino mocked her smile and took another drink of her sake. Why are you all alone? With a sigh, she asked. Is it bothering you? Well, yeah, a little, Tenten replied. Are you mad or something? Why would I be mad? She asked. Because you're all alone over here and everyone else has a man to give them love and attention, she said in a joking manner. Ino didn't take it that way. She chuckled. Oh yeah, I totally wish I had a dim-witted guy to make out with at a party filled with idiots. She mocked with a fake smile. Tenten took that as Ino's version of a joke, but she decided to play along. Chuckling, she put a hand to her chest dramatically. Are you trying to call us idiots? No, honey. I did, she said in a demeaning way with a tone one would you when explaining to a child. Tenten's smile faded slightly, trying to decide if she were actually joking or not. Brushing it off, she switched up the topic. You're a meanie, she exclaimed in her childish voice. Hey, what happened with that guy I set you up with? Ino gave her an irritated look and then looked away. Ignoring her question completely, Tenten was now truly feeling disrespected. Hello, am I talking to myself? Ino sighed and brought the bottle back up to her mouth. Might as well be. She whispered into the bottle before taking another sip. Excuse me? She asked, truly not hearing what she said. Ino got tired of it as she was too drunk to continue listening to the girl's annoying voice. Downing the rest of the bottle, she exhaled and looked to the bun-haired girl. Look, Tenten, she began, slurring the words together. If I am being honest, I would much rather sit here in utter silence and complete isolation than to have to listen to your ridiculous rants about how great Niji is in everything he does. Tenten was about to argue. That's not WH-. Yes, it is, Ino said, rolling her eyes. That's all you ever talk about. That's all you and Sakura ever talk about. It's the most eventful thing within your sad, dull little life, so you bring it up in almost every situation so that you can feel important for a few minutes every day. Then when you get the attention you so desperately crave to justify your own prominence, you act all bashful and humble like you don't want all of that attention on you. It's really sad, Ten, and I can guarantee you more than a few people have noticed. It's not just me. So, just save yourself some embarrassment and go back over there with your feminine man before he realizes he's gay and leaves you. Or worse, slits his own throat in realization of how bitchy you actually are. Ino said, getting to her feet, planning on leaving, wobbling towards the door. Ten remained in her spot with her mouth agape. She stared at Ino's retreating form, waiting for her to turn around and start laughing at that ridiculous joke. When she didn't, she got angry. "Hey, fuck you," she yelled out, getting the attention of the other guests. Ino sighed and turned to the girl. "You're just a lonely bitch who can't find a boyfriend. What the hell gives you the right to talk down on anyone?" Sakura, being a peacemaker, got to her feet as quickly as she could. Hey, she called out. "What's going on?" The two ignored her as they stared at each other. Ten, I'm not talking down on you. I am making an observation. I don't blame you. You've lived your whole life believing in society's set standard of social acceptance, as have I, she admitted. But unlike me, instead of standing out, you flew under the radar, not noticed in a negative or positive light. Now that you're older, you're starting to feel as though your younger years have all been a waste. So, you're having a sort of pre-midlife crisis in which you are searching for any form of appraisal you can receive from any corner you can receive it from. If that's what makes you feel like you matter, then by all means, do as you must. Ino responded smugly with half-lidded eyes, clearly intoxicated to some extent. Ten was clearly steaming mad, and Niji got behind her, wrapping an arm around her waist, gently pulling her away. "Fuck. You lonely, psychotic bitch," she said, kicking off a slew of curse words that poured out of her mouth as she was dragged out of the back door by Niji and a few of the other former famous rookies, including Ino's own teammates. "Ino?" Sakura called her name cautiously. "What's going on?" Ino just smiled back at her as if she were walking on clouds. "Oh, nothing, Mrs. Namikaze. I'm peachy," she replied. Sakura shook her head, still hearing the horribly aggressive remarks flying out of Tenten's mouth from the backyard. Everyone else was quiet, most of them wanting to see what would happen. Menma, Sasuke, and Mito were the only two left sitting on the couch. "Why would you say that to Ten?" she asked her. "Well, I could have very well lied to her, possibly fed her with self-confidence so that she could prance around this place like she's the best damn thing to touch this earth because of the guy she's with, but there's no healing in that. You've got to break a piece of the wall before you can fix the foundation, Sakura," she explained in her doctor's lingo. "We've got to break walls," she slurred out in a harsh whisper dramatically. Sakura shook her head. "Ino, that's your friend. We're your friends, not your patients," Sakura said as if she figured the blonde girl had amnesia or something. Ino laughed at that. "Friends? Ha ha ha," she said, laughing harder and harder. "Are you fucking insane?" she asked. Sakura was about to reply but was cut off. "You've got to be fucking insane." Mito stood up from Sasuke's lap. "Ino, what the hell is wrong with you?" she asked, joining the fight. Mito, she said mockingly, eyeing the girl up and down. "Gosh, how are you related to him?" she whispered lowly, missing everyone's ears. "Look, I don't know what the hell is wrong with you, but you need to go and apologize to Ten, right now," the red-headed girl said in a threatening manner. "Wow," Ino remarked. "What a world we live in, huh? Where we actually have to apologize for speaking the truth," she said as if she were giving a speech. "How ridiculous is that? We shouldn't lie to our friends," Mito remarked randomly, making the blonde drunk laugh harder and harder. "Ino, stop," Sakura demanded. "Oh no, Mito's right," Ino said suddenly. "We shouldn't lie to our friends," she said, pacing around the room. "In fact, we should all apologize for lying to our friends," she said. "Ino," Mito said daringly. She just smiled at her. "Oh, you want to start, Mito?" she asked. "Go ahead and tell Sasuke your dirty little secret. I'm sure he'd love to know," she said, piquing the Uchiha's interest. Mito continued staring Ino down with ill intent. "Stop." "Oh, but what kind of friend? Lies to another?" A boyfriend at that, she said preposterously. Mito didn't say anything. What's she talking about, Mito? Sasuke demanded. Seeing his friend getting angry, Menma quickly stood to his feet to help. Ino, I think it's time for you to leave, he said, standing in front of her. Ino's smile increased. And then the kiss ass, she said happily with a giggle. Hey, if I leave now, you won't know Sakura's secrets, she chided. Menma hesitated slightly. We don't keep secrets, he said, pushing her gently towards the door. She only laughed as he basically picked her up off her feet and walked her to the front door. Before they got there, she continued. Oh, I wouldn't be too sure, Sasuke-kun. Oops, she said cutely, clearly meaning to make that mistake. I mean, Menma. She then began laughing like a drunken psycho. Menma turned around, not sure what she meant by that. But to his luck, Shikamaru and Choji were jogging back into the house at the call of Mito to haul their teammate back to her home. They both noticed the utter tension and silence as they walked through, not wanting to get involved. God damn it, Ino, Shikamaru said, grabbing onto her. What the hell have you done? He asked as she just cackled sadistically. He and Choji hauled the girl off, leaving the house with a heavy atmosphere that was uncomfortable to sit in. The group of friends who showed up for a relaxing day of being together now had more than a few elephants in the room to discuss or ignore, depending on what they decided to do. 2 days later, Inochi, I really don't understand your motive here, Minato said, leaning back in his chair with his hands on his head. Ibiki stood next to him, waiting for an explanation as well. He had a hunch, but he wanted to be sure. Inochi, still looking as bad as he did a few days ago, sighed and scratched his head. Look, I'm not gonna lie to you, he began. Ino is Naruto's new therapist, he said, shocking Minato. Your daughter? He asked. Yeah. Minato, I mean, no disrespect, but your son is nothing but trouble. Ino can't handle someone like him, he said, fully explaining the situation with as much desperation as he could muster up. Minato understood now, and was about to reply until Ibiki jumped in. On the contrary, Inochi, I don't think anyone else can, he said, tossing the vanilla folder from his hands onto Minato's desk. He continued talking as Minato read over it. Within the 2 months under Dr. Ino Yamanaka's care, Naruto Namikaze has shown incredible improvement. Statements from his guards report he has shown a significant decrease in aggression since he has been under her care. Dr. Yamanaka's reports show a periodical improvement in his behavior within his sessions as well. Removing him from that environment now would only cause him to fall back harder into that mental pit he was in when he arrived. Inochi couldn't believe it. He hadn't seen his daughter since the night of their argument, but he had assumed that she'd be falling apart at this point. It's not that he had no faith in his daughter's abilities. It was just this particular patient. He couldn't last 2 months with the psycho, and now he's learning of Ino's strange effect on him? It was unbelievable. That can't be, he said in disbelief. Minato was surprised by what he was reading as well. I mean, read it yourself, he said, passing over the folder. Inochi read over Ino's report, which began exactly as he thought it would. One thing he noticed was how thick the packet was. There were hundreds of reports, but she was only assigned to him 2 months ago. Why are there so many? He asked aloud. Dr. Yamanaka requested multiple sessions every day after her second session. I guess she saw something in him that sparked her need to help him, Ibiki said. Inochi was seeing it himself. With every page he flipped, the reports got more and more positive. Even seeing it with his own eyes, he couldn't believe it. It wasn't real. He slowly began shaking his head. No, he said lowly. Minato rubbed his face. Inochi, no, there has to be something. Some kind of motive for why he's doing this, he said, trying to rationalize this. There's got to be a reason he's pretending to. Inochi, Ibiki interrupted him. That's enough, he said simply, maintaining intense eye contact with the man to get his point across. Look, I get it. You want to protect Ino, but she is not a little girl anymore, he said, shaking his head. She is a capable and frankly brilliant psychiatrist. The asylum is under my command now, and as far as I'm concerned, Naruto Namikaze is getting the help he needs from one of the best and brightest of my staff. He has not done anything as of late that would be grounds for his dismissal, he stated with finality in his voice. Inochi just shook his head and stared at the documents as if they weren't real. Minato stared at him, waiting for him to say something. When all he did was shake his head, he had to find something to tell him. Inochi, I don't know what to say. What is there to say? Inochi asked, tossing the documents back onto his desk. He rubbed his eyes in irritation. Sometimes things just don't work out, he said ominously before turning to the door. I'm sorry, Minato, he said before opening the door to leave. Minato wasn't sure what he meant by that, hoping it was just meant as an apology for wasting his time. He didn't get a chance to tell him it was fine before he shut the door. Ibiki sighed. I am sorry, Hokage-sama, he said. I'll try and talk to him. He'll be all right. Yeah, he said looking down at his desk. I understand. Ibiki nodded. Just a man protecting his daughter. We'd all do the same if put in that position. Haha. Ino laughed out at something Naruto said as they sat in their usual session room. He chuckled along with her as well. Their latest session was coming to an end and it was informative for him. Ino was extremely ditzy today compared to how she usually is. It seemed like she just didn't care for the session anymore. Like she was more interested in joking around with him than trying to do her job. That's so mean. Haha. Chuckling, he responded. It made you laugh, he said with a smile as she was still calming down from her fit of giggles. Yeah, I guess so, she said, catching her breath and sighing in contentment. She stared at Naruto with stars in her eyes, waiting for him to say something. All he did was smile back at her as if he were amused by her. What? She asked him. He shook his head. Your smile is beguiling, he said. Ino bit her lips together and looked down at the table, trying to hide her blush. A knock at the door cut the moment short, signifying the end of their session. Naruto's smile faded away, as did Ino's. She gathered up the files and notepads she hadn't even touched in this session. I guess that's it, she said. I'll be back tomorrow morning, she said, reassuring him as the guards came in to take him back. Naruto nodded and smiled at her. I know, he said as they dragged him out the room. Ino finished packing up her stuff and headed for the door with a smile on her face and a warm feeling sitting in her chest. She couldn't wait for the next day. Break. Making it to his room, Naruto's cuffs were removed from his wrists and ankles. He didn't care to turn around and look at the guards shut his door. He just walked further into his room, planning on reading one of his books. But he stopped, realizing high door was never shut. Turning around curiously, he watched as Inochi was shutting his door with him inside. Peeking out the door, he could see one of his guards laying on the ground. He looked to the blonde man in curiosity, wondering what it was he was doing, until he saw the kunai in his hand. And cliffhanger, Chapter 8. Inochi stood there with the blade held firmly in his grasp. His face set in a look of remorse for what he was about to do. He looked Naruto in the eye from his spot at the door. His stomach churned seeing the nonchalant look of the red-headed man in white. It was daunting just gazing into those cold blues. In this moment, he realized things he had never truly noticed before, such as the way Naruto's ANBU tattoo seems to have been peeled off, or the way Naruto's eyes never gave away emotion. In his studies, he's learned to tell the motive of someone by the dilation of their pupils. Feelings of happiness, affection, or laughter will cause it to expand. Feelings of anger, hatred, or fear it closes, not his. His eyes stay fixed in tiny pinpoint dots, unfazed by anything. It was haunting to have those two piercing bullets beaming into your own orbs. Wink. Inochi Yamanaka, he said with a smile creeping onto his face. I must say I am surprised. Inochi took a timid step forward. No words would come to his mind as he thought up something to say. To what do I owe this visit? He asked as if he were oblivious to the kunai and fighting stance. I came to kill you, he said, completely out of breath for some reason. Naruto's smile never changed, and he didn't care to get into a fighting stance. Kill me? He asked. What for? You know why? Inochi shouted out. Naruto just raised an eyebrow as if he didn't. You're trying to use Ino somehow. I know it. Use her? Naruto asked curiously. Of course I'm trying to use her, he said, angering the man. She is my doctor after all. I'm trying to use her to get better and make it out of this deranged, psychotic mind of mine, he said, spitting that word out in a clear way to mock the man. Inochi just adjusted his grip on his kunai, hoping to end this quick. Naruto chuckled at him. Inochi, look, we both know you can't beat me. Even without chakra I could kill you, Naruto said. Inochi wouldn't listen as he slowly began circling the younger man as a lion would, preparing to attack. Naruto sighed, and when he did, Inochi jumped into action. He charged Naruto with a roundhouse kick that was grabbed effortlessly and held onto with an unbelievable grip. Ah! He yelled, slashing at the boy's arm and jumping back. He didn't have much time to nurse his injury before he was kneed square in the chin and thrown against the wall. Naruto had his forearm in Inochi's throat with his feet dangling from the ground. The hand with the kunai was pinned to the wall as well. You really wanted to kill me, huh? Naruto said, no sign of effort whatsoever for him. Inochi, this was such a sad attempt at my life. Inochi just gurgled, trying to rip the redhead's arm from his throat so he could breathe. Since you are probably going to die here pretty soon, I will give you a small bit of final satisfaction in knowing that you were right. Dr. Yamanaka plays quite the role in my escape, and she has been progressing quite nicely. In fact, I think this right here may be the final key. The last hill to climb before she devotes herself to me. Inochi was seeing absolute red at this point, and he struggled harder and harder to break free but was having very little effect. Once she outlives her usefulness in my escape, I'll most likely allow her to live simply because of her services. But if she becomes a hindrance such as yourself, she just may have to greet you in the afterlife, he said with a sinister grin. Hell, since I'm a nice guy, I'll send your wife as well, he said with a laugh until he could hear keys urgently being shoved into his door from the outside. His grin increased as he released his grip on the man. He delivered a very sharp jab to a spot on his throat. Inochi began coughing vehemently, and he realized he couldn't speak. Naruto seemed to stumble back on his heels, giving him the chance he needed. He pounced on his downed form and held his kunai up with both hands, intent on driving it straight through the chest of his target. Faintly, he heard a yell of Inochi, stop! He paused and looked up to the door to see Ibiki and two of the guards ready to take him. He couldn't speak, but he would not leave this place without ending his life. He brought the kunai up and drove it down as hard as he could. His strike ended when a kunai lodged itself into the center of his forehead. Naruto stared up lifelessly at the kunai just a few inches from his chest. He stared into the fading light in the eyes of the man who was leaking blood on his face. A very slight smile creeping onto his face, watching Inochi's body slump lifelessly off to the side. This would definitely move things along. Ino sat in her room staring at her ceiling, her mind gone completely. She was feeling a little anxious as she sorted out her recent emotions for the things in her life, mainly Naruto. This was supposed to be a professional relationship between them, and yet she felt so connected. How deeply she was into it, she couldn't tell. What would be the repercussions of this turning into love? That was the real question at this point. What would her friends think? Well, her old friends, namely Mito and Menma, or the village. What would happen to her for falling in love with a patient? She'd probably be locked up in the same institution, separated by wall upon wall, no more sessions, no more contact with her supposed love. She couldn't take that. Ino wished it were simpler. She wished it was as simple as just declaring him sane again and getting him out, but that wasn't the case. If she declared him sane, he'd possibly be moved back to the prison. That would definitely split them apart. Oftentimes, she wished they could just go. Just get out of the village and be together. But what if her feelings weren't returned? What if Naruto didn't love her the way she loved him? Then what would she do? So many questions and no way to get them answered. There was a tap at her window next to her bed. She slowly looked over to see an ANBU agent. She sighed and looked back up to her ceiling. Her window slid open and the ANBU agent addressed her. Yamanaka-sama, it is to my dearest regret that I must inform you, Inochi Yamanaka has been killed. Ino showed no sign of emotion whatsoever. In fact, he wasn't even sure if she heard him. If you would like, I could escort you to the hospital. Your mother is there. It's fine. Thank you, she said flatly, dismissing the man. The ANBU agent lingered there for a few seconds before shutting her window and leaving. Ino's gaze remained locked on her ceiling. No emotion shown whatsoever. These were the first signs of alexithymia. She didn't feel anything. She was supposed to feel sad about news like that. If it were a few months ago, she'd be completely heartbroken. Now, it was just like someone told her breakfast was ready. She remained there for another hour before he rolling out of bed and throwing her sandals on, heading out the door. Break, walking into her old childhood home. Ino was greeted to the sight of her mother and a glob of her friends comforting her. There was Kushina, Yoshino, Mito, Tsum, and others Ino didn't know. Her mother, dramatic as ever, was balled up on the couch with a tissue pressed firmly against her face. The others around her were whispering words of comfort that seemed to be doing nothing. Then she saw Ino and, surprising to everyone, she saw red. You! She spit out harshly at her. You fucking! She yelled as she stood up and tried to jump at her. Ino stood in her spot, confused but unfazed. The women around her did their best to hold her back, not sure what was happening. I fucking! She yelled out until her string of curses mushed together in her crying. God, if you had never taken that stupid case, he'd still be here. Kiori-chan. Kushina yelled among the others in disbelief at their friend's words. Calm down, you're just upset. She tried to reason with the crying woman. No! Get off me! She yelled, still trying to force her way to Ino. Get your fucking hands off me! She yelled, trying her damned hardest. Mito stood to her feet and led the still silent Ino out the door to defuse the situation. Ino stood on the porch looking out to her mother's garden for a few seconds. Before Mito could say anything, the blonde began walking down the pathway. Hesitant at first, Mito slowly followed her. On the way out of the garden, Ino plucked a rose from the bush and continued walking. Mito followed Ino, trying to think of something to say to her. She was a few paces behind her, staring at the back of her head. She realized how long it must have been since they actually spoke. Of course, she remembered the party a few days ago, but that was not a conversation. It was just drunken Ino starting mess, and they all understood. Truth be told, Mito was still a little angry up to the point she heard of Ino's father dying from her mother. She was angered by the heap of mess that took place between she and Sasuke. It wasn't something she was prepared to deal with, but after a long talk, they dealt with the issues and resolved the conflict. Now, staring at the blonde woman's back, she was mesmerized by how long her loose hair was. It was much longer now that it wasn't in her old ponytail. It was quite a bold fashion choice for Ino Yamanaka to let her hair flow freely. Thinking back, that's how it was at the party as well. Was it just her new style? Her hair aside, there was a lot different with the girl. She wasn't normal anymore. She was always quiet, a lot less social, and very condescending. Mito couldn't understand why that is. Maybe she just got out of a bad relationship. Or maybe she was in one. When Mito finally zoned out of her own thinking, she realized they were at the Hokage monument. Ino just stood there, staring out at the village with dead-looking eyes. Mito slowly crept up beside her. There were words on her mind, but her mouth refused to speak them. They were words of encouragement and questions for the scorned. For whatever reason, her tongue wouldn't extend them to Ino. She stared at the side of her face, trying to get a read on her old friend. She had no shine in her eyes, no smile on her face, no tear stains or tears brimming in her eyes. For someone as expressive as Ino usually is, this was very unsettling. Mito, Ino called out slowly. Mito turned her head more towards her to display to her that she is listening. Are you in love? Mito blinked at that. In her mind, it was almost obvious what this was about. Ino was still in love with Sasuke, and she was jealous of her. It explains the party incident, but not much else. What could she say to make her feel better? What could she do? Yeah. Ino, she said. Yeah. Ino's eyes never shifted from the village. What does it feel like? Mito turned back to the village and thought about it. It's wonderful. Ino shook her head. But what does it feel like? She repeated, putting emphasis on feel. Mito turned back to her, wondering what it was she wanted her to tell her. It feels like a warmth in your heart that burns when you're not with that person, but comforts when you are. Ino's hand came up and touched her heart, just poking at her chest for a second. Mito watched her curiously. Then she started chuckling, then giggling, then laughing. Mito watched her laugh into the wind and saw that a tear ran down her face. When she finally calmed down, she was left there with a content smile, and she turned to Mito. I'm in love, she said. Mito wasn't sure what to say since she still had a hunch she was talking about Sasuke, but she couldn't accuse her of such a thing without being certain. Ino's chuckling came back. Fuck! She yelled out, scaring Mito when she dropped to her knees. Mito quickly kneeled down next to her, rubbing her back. Ino, what's wrong? This is a good thing, Mito said, reassuring her. Ino just continued to cry as she shook her head. Is he taken? She asked cautiously. Ino shook her head, and Mito released the breath she didn't know she was holding. At least it wasn't Sasuke. Then what's the problem? Ino sat back on her heels and stared out to the village again, her eyes and cheeks puffy and red. She ran her hands through her hair and held it in place on top of her head. Mito, what would you do if, for whatever reason, you couldn't be with Sasuke? She asked her with desperation just oozing from her words. Mito was as confused as she's been all night as she thought about it. If I couldn't be with Sasuke? She repeated the question to give herself a little time to think. I'd do just about anything I could do. I'd do anything to make it to where we can be together, she said after some thought. She had no idea the monster she just unleashed with her words of truth. Ino's red puffy eyes stared intently at the village, as if it were going to be the last time she saw it. Her heart was set in stone, and the objective was now apparent. Kushina sat next to Kiori as the last remaining friend there. It was well beyond 2 in the morning, but she refused to leave until Mito brought Ino back to speak with her mother. Kiori had eventually calmed down with her rant of blame placing and realized how ridiculous her accusation was. She was crying now because of it. She had just demonized her daughter for doing something she believed she could do. It wasn't Ino's fault. It was Inochi's obsession with that man that caused this, and nothing else. There was no one to blame here but Inochi. Her heart throbbed as she thought of what she told her daughter. It was blame for the sake of blame, and she wanted so badly to apologize to her. They had been waiting for 2 hours now. Mito finally came into the door, a confused expression on her face. Where's Ino? Kiori asked, getting to her feet hopefully. Mito looked at the woman somberly. She went home, Mito said. Kiori's tears came back full force and she bawled her eyes out. Kushina pulled the woman into her chest once again and began whispering sweet nothings into her ear as if it were a practiced skill. Mito, tell your father I'll be staying here with Kiori, please. She told the redhead, who nodded to her and left. 2 hours later, Mito walked into her and Sasuke's apartment. It was dark and quiet, so she figured he was asleep. She kicked her shoes off and headed to take a shower. While in there, she thought over what Ino and she actually talked about. It wasn't what she expected to discuss with someone who just lost their father. Why was she thinking about love when her father had just died? Why did she not even mention her father? Was she bottling it up? If so, then she'd have to fix that tomorrow. She'd have to reason with Sakura and Tenten to help her, of course, since they were still a little mad about the whole party incident. But they'd understand when she told her the circumstances. Ino had been far too distant for far too long. When she finished with her shower, she dressed in a plain t-shirt and some shorts as she climbed into bed with Sasuke. As soon as she did, he wrapped his arm around her as if he had been waiting for her. She smiled and rubbed his forearm. Yeah, if there was anything that prevented her from being with Sasuke, she'd do absolutely anything. That was a fact. That begged the question, who was it Ino was talking about? What would she have to do for this mystery man she had fallen in love with? Mito prayed it was nothing insane, but by the way she was acting, she could take a guess it wasn't something innocent she was talking about. What if it were something like deserting the village? Or killing someone who was trying to kill him? Maybe she fell in love with a civilian who got into some kind of trouble? She would ask the blonde girl tomorrow. Maybe as her friends, they could help her in whatever this endeavor of love was. It was the right thing to do. A duffel bag over her shoulder, and a hooded ANBU agent behind her. Ino walked into the asylum, instructing 2 of the guards that she was having a midnight session with her patient. Seeing the ANBU with her, the 2 nodded and went to retrieve the patient while she signed in. She and the ANBU went to the room and waited patiently. Ino, what are we doing here? The man asked, apparently being quite familiar with her. Toshi, just help me with this one thing please. She told him simply. Toshi stared at her curiously. He knew the patient she came to see, and he also knew what happened a few hours ago. If we're here to kill or harm him in any way, I will not participate, he said, watching her search through the big bag she brought with her. Ino rolled her eyes. We're not, she said. I'm just here to speak with him. Then why am I here? He asked her. I just wanted a friend with me, she said convincingly. Toshi looked at her and sighed beneath his mask. But why do I have to be in full uniform? Ino sighed at the continuous string of questions. So that you look more intimidating, Toshi, she said as if it were obvious. He looked at her in confusion once more. He was an ANBU as well, and I'm just a recruit. I don't think he'll be intimidated, he told her. Ino shook her head. Believe me, he will, she said with a sigh as they then waited in silence. When she could hear his footsteps coming down the hallway, she dug in her bag again and pulled out a bottle of blue pills. Here, she said, handing one to Toshi. Before he could speak, she continued. Put it in your mouth and bite down on it. It's a Yamanaka family recipe. It will allow you to go into his mindscape with me. That's what I plan to do. It will make you feel a bit woozy at first, but it should pass. With that being enough of an explanation, he lifted his mask enough to slip the pill into his mouth and do as he was told. The door opened up to 2 guards bringing Naruto in. He looked over to Ino with a smile and didn't miss the way her lips curled up slightly. He then looked over to the blank-faced hooded ANBU agent a few feet behind her. When he was sat down, the 2 guards nodded to Ino and the ANBU agent before leaving the room. They sat there in silence and Naruto looked as though he were about to say something. Well, he began until he was cut off by Ino putting a finger up, silencing whatever he was about to say. He looked at her strangely for a second until the ANBU agent started to wobble on his feet. Naruto stared at him in confusion when he fell over and began convulsing. He looked back to Ino to see her smiling at him. He grinned back at her, catching onto whatever was happening. Hey, she said with a smile and watery eyes. Naruto smiled back at her. Hey, Ino bit her grinning lip, trying to find words to say. I brought you something, she said happily, pulling her bag up. Reaching in, she pulled out a bottle of ink and a brush with a few papers. Naruto smiled at her. For practicing your calligraphy and whatnot, she said, nodding his way. He nodded back. Oh yes, of course, he said as if it were obvious. He looked at her in amusement. What? She asked. Can't do it? She asked. He grinned and held his wrists up, showing her the cuffs as if she couldn't see them. She gave him a slick smile and began crawling across the table seductively. In a smooth motion, she pulled a kunai out, whirling it about before driving it down into the metal table, lodging it into the surface right between his hands. He didn't even flinch. Get yourself out, Mr. ANBU, she mocked as she laid down on the table with her feet crossed behind her, much like a kid laying before a fireplace. Not gonna make it easy for me? He asked with a smile, remembering their first conversation. Where's the fun in that? She replied, catching on. Naruto chuckled and pulled the kunai from the table. After a bit of messing with the lock, the cuffs finally opened, freeing his hands. Rolling his wrists out, he stood up and removed his shirt, giving Ino quite the sight as she stared at his chiseled body that seemed like he hadn't missed a day of training. She grinned at him and watched as he laid the sealing paper in front of her and began marking it. "You sure you know what you're doing?" she asked. "It's been a while," he smirked. "I've seen these seals every day for 5 years. I know what I'm doing." "Guess you're lucky they didn't put any on your back then, huh?" she asked him. He chuckled. "That, my dear, is the confidence of these simple-minded fools." "Like me?" she asked him playfully as she flipped over to her back. He continued to mark the seals on the sheet of paper. "Well, you're nothing like them now, are you?" he asked rhetorically. "No, you're slightly better." "Slightly?" she asked him. He put the brush down and stood to where his face was directly over hers. Ino's eyes continued to dart between his lips and his eyes as he spoke. "Yes, slightly," he said, nodding. "You're still stuck in this fantastic little mind of yours," he said, tapping her forehead. "If you can step outside of that, then you'll be free," he said, going back to the seal. "Will you free me?" she asked him. He halted his writing and looked at her. "Perhaps," he said simply, going back to his work. Ino got off the table and stripped Toshi of his ANBU attire. When there was no more need for him, she performed a low-level fire technique she knew and burned the body. When she turned around, Naruto was staring at her with a look she wasn't familiar with regarding him. It was close to amazement with a hint of further amusement. "What?" she asked him innocently, with the burning body behind her still raging with flames. Naruto smiled at her. "Nothing. But I am done," he said, taking the paper and slapping it to his chest. It began to glow for a few seconds until Ino could visibly see the prison seal begin to slide off of his body, as if someone were pouring water down his frame. Naruto's eyes shot open as if he were a junkie who just got their fix. It was the first time chakra has coursed freely through his body in 5 years. Holding his hands out, he created 2 Rasengan and chuckled. "You, doctor, have done me a great service," he said, stalking over to her, letting the balls of blue chakra die out. Ino continued to smile at him as he came closer and closer. Before he came too close, she put her fist on his chest. "We're not done yet," she said, patting the ANBU uniform on the table. He raised an eyebrow but got the hint. He slipped into the uniform as Ino watched him from her seat hungrily. When he was fully dressed, he put the mask on. "Let's get out of here," she said until he stopped her. "Just one more thing," he said, going through hand signs. In a poof of smoke, a naked Naruto clone stood there. Naruto wrote a few seals on his chest and the clone put his white clothes on. He then looked back over to the spot the body was being burnt. He went through a few hand signs and used a much more powerful fire technique that completely incinerated the body within seconds. When that was done, he performed a duo technique of wind and water to cool the room back down to normal temperature. From there, Ino and the ANBU left the room while the 2 guards came back in and escorted Naruto back to his room. They walked out of the asylum with absolutely no question being asked. No one stopped them or looked at them whatsoever. Naruto Namikaze was free. Break. Naruto left the village via the ANBU secret entrance, with Ino following his every move. When they were on the outside of the wall, Naruto breathed a sigh of relief. "Well, thank you very much for your help, Dr. Yamanaka. You, I must say, have been my favorite doctor," he said as if they were parting ways. "Wait, what?" Ino asked, stepping closer to him. "What are you talking about?" she asked him urgently, with a very awful feeling welling up in her stomach. Naruto raised his eyebrow at her. "I am thanking you for your services up to this point," he said simply. Ino shook her head. "What does that mean? Does that mean you don't need me anymore?" "Precisely. Now you're getting it," he said, clapping his hands together. Ino couldn't breathe. No, I fucking helped you," she yelled at him. Naruto shortened their distance in a second and pinned her to the tree behind her with her collar in his hand. No, what you did was try and warp my perception. You left me in a black hole of rage and confusion." Wink. Ino shook her head. "No, I love you," she told him desperately. He smiled at her and began chuckling. "I love you," she yelled louder. "And you love me too." He let her shirt go and began to pace around. "Oh, is that so? Ha ha." He laughed again. "Yes, you do," she yelled. You feel like no one has ever loved you before, so you won't accept my love because you're afraid it's not real, she said, giving him so insight into what she deduced within her own mind. Naruto stopped in his striding. Ah, how wrong you are, he said, stalking towards her. No, love causes weakness when your so-called lover is weaker than you. That's why this little fling between us ends here, he explained, pulling a kunai from the holster on his leg. What are you gonna do? You gonna kill me? She asked. Naruto chuckled and threw the kunai her way. Ino didn't move or flinch whatsoever when the kunai hit the tree a few centimeters close to her head. Naruto seemed impressed by that, if even a little. No, I'm not gonna kill ya, he said, stalking closer to her. If you die, it is because you're weak and this little spat of ours will have been for nothing, he said, pulling the kunai from the tree. What are you gonna do to me? She asked him, not a hint of fear in her voice whatsoever. Naruto stared her in the eye as if judging her resolve. Well, he said, turning around. Follow me and you will see. You may back out at any point of our little experiment. If you choose to do so, you may possibly have time to return before they realize you're gone, he said as she followed him through the woods. She walked right next to him and looked him in the eyes. Never, she said seriously with a fire in her eyes that Naruto just had to notice. Yeah, well, we'll see about that, he said. They walked through the woods surrounding Konoha for what felt like hours until they came upon a somewhat secluded area. Naruto bent down and pushed chakra through the ground and a secret passageway began to open up. He stood to his feet and pointed into it. After you, he said with a daring smile. Ino didn't hesitate and went right in. She stumbled through the darkness for a few seconds until the torches lining the walls seemingly lit themselves. When they did, she knew exactly where they were. They were in one of the bases of the notorious psychopath Orochimaru. There were various broken glass tubes and quarantine signs all over the place. It would seem as though this one was already disassembled, so what were they doing here? She followed Naruto as he walked deeper into the base. Soon, they entered another room and onto a platform, overlooking vats of some kind of black liquid. You see that? Naruto asked her, pointing into the stuff. Ino was getting a little worried at this point. That is what made me the man I am today. That is your trial. You bathe in this liquid, and I will accept this love of yours, he explained. Ino looked back into it to see it was boiling. In other words, it was probably like acid at this point and would most likely kill her. She looked at him with a broken heart. I know what you're trying to do, she said, staring at his chest, unable to look him in the eyes. You want me to kill myself, so that you don't have to deal with me anymore, she said. Naruto showed no expression at her astute observation. No, I want you to prove your devotion, he explained. Prove your love to me. Ino shook her head. You know I'll die if I touch that stuff. You're not an idiot, and neither am I. Still, he was unfazed. So, you're saying you wouldn't die for me? He asked her, casually staring her in the eyes. Ino's eyes moved up the length of his face until they were deadlocked in a staring match. He was daring her to do it. He really wanted her to die. It hurt her heart worse than if he had just taken that kunai and plunged it into her chest. After everything she's done for him, she was nothing but a nuisance to him? Ino truly believed she had found a connection in someone. Clearly, her assumption was misplaced, as he didn't seem to care much about her. She fell for him twice and got hurt both times. What more did she expect? She slowly backpedaled until her feet were hanging over the ledge. Turning around, the vat of chemicals was less than a foot away from the ledge. So hot, the bubbles that popped splashed up and hit her ankles, burning her a bit. If Naruto didn't want her, then no one would. More accurately, if she couldn't have Naruto, then she no longer wanted to live anymore. Maybe death was what called her at this point. Slowly, she began to fall back. In less than a second, she thought back to all of her best moments in life, most of them involving Naruto himself. Even as she was a few milliseconds from death, she couldn't help but love the red-headed psycho. This was the cause of unrequited love. Death. She could feel the heat of the vat of chemicals burning her back at this point, but she could also feel something tugging her. Opening her eyes, Naruto was holding the front of her shirt. The bottom of her hair was dipped in the chemicals, but her feet were still on the ledge. He saved her. A tear leaked out of her eye as she looked up into the blues of Naruto, who was smiling down at her. "Now that," he said with a chuckle. "That's proof." Pulling her up closer, he leaned down and kissed her. Ino melted into the passionate connection and wrapped her arms around his neck. He pulled them back onto the platform and she deepened the kiss immensely, not wanting this moment to end. A duo was born that would shake the world like natural disasters. 3 hours later, Ibiki checked over the sign-in sheet, finding it weird that Ino would come and see Naruto as late as she had last night, especially with the circumstances of Inochi's death. So he was headed to check on the redhead to ensure he was still alive. Maybe she had done something to him. With the tray of breakfast in his hand, he opened the door. Naruto was laying on his mat staring up at the ceiling. He looked over at Ibiki but didn't say anything. "Hey Naruto," he said, walking over to him. "I was just coming to check up on you is all." Naruto still didn't respond. Ibiki ignored it and put the tray down next to him. "I know Ino came to see you last night," he said questioningly. "Was there any reason for that?" "No reason. Just to talk," he responded with a sudden smile. Ibiki was surprised by that. It was weird, of course, but Naruto was always weird, so he didn't pay too much mind to it. "Right, well," he said, looking at his shirt. He stopped and a sickening feeling dropped to his gut. Slowly, he looked into the eyes of the patient to see a mocking glint in his eyes. Ibiki knew. This was not Naruto Namake's. The sealing ink on his body was smudged, meaning it was written with paper ink, not body ink. He pulled a kunai from his pouch and drove it into his body. He took a timid step back when it actually stabbed him. For a second, he thought he was hallucinating and he actually killed a patient, but then the body disappeared in a poof of blood and smoke. God damn it. Naruto Namake's was not here. Ibiki stood to his feet and ran out the room as fast as he could. This was not good. This was far from good. He ran out of the asylum intent on informing the Hokage of the troubling news. No one would be ready for what was coming. No one. Chapter 9. 1 year later, a house in the middle of the forest surrounding Kumo was in an uproar of panic as the 2 remaining occupants ran for their lives. One was a brown-haired man with a cut running down the side of his face, leaking fresh blood. The other was an elderly woman who was struggling up the stairs. They were both covered in blood that wasn't all theirs. The brown-haired man pushed the older woman to make her move faster. When they were on the 2nd floor, he pushed her into the hall closet and shut the door. They both scrambled to the back wall, hidden in the shadows of the hanging clothes. The man was holding the woman's mouth shut to stop her whimpering. In the distance, they could hear the sound of someone screaming for their life. It was a man, one that they both seemed to be quite familiar with, as his cries incited more and more tears from them. Then suddenly the screaming was stopped, and they both knew why. Now, the only sound was the faint yet clear sound of footsteps slowly treading up the stairs. With every step, there was an extra 2 thuds that they couldn't place. Then, whoever it was finally reached the top step and stopped. The house fell deathly silent for a short few seconds. Then, the assailant began walking again. This time, they could clearly hear something being dragged across the floor. It sounded sharp and metal. 2 doors away from the closet they were in, the door was kicked in roughly. When the person saw no one in there, they went to the next door and kicked it in. Again, no one. Through the shutters of the closet, the brown-haired man could now see the body of the person as they walked in front of the door. It was clearly a female by the curves of the body. She was dressed in a white form-fitting shirt underneath a red jacket that only went down to below her ribcage, which she left unzipped. She also wore a short, tight pair of black shorts that didn't reach below her mid-thigh. The whole outfit drenched in blood splatter. In her hands were 2 swords, held in reverse grip with the tips touching the ground. Most likely the dragging sound he heard. She was staring at their door, this one being one that opened out. She went to grab the doorknob and the brown-haired man tightened his grip on the elderly lady's mouth to keep her from screaming, hoping and praying to whatever divine power that they somehow made it out of this. He shut his eyes, awaiting the inevitable. Suddenly, there was a crashing sound in the room next to theirs. The girl released the doorknob and turned her head. Now, The brown-haired man got a peek at her hair, which was blood-red towards the bottom but faded into a bright blonde. She walked away to investigate what the sound was, and the brown-haired man breathed a sigh of relief as quietly as he could. He loosened his grip slightly on the old lady and whispered to her to stay quiet. Slowly and gently, he crawled his way over to the door. She had already partially opened the door, so he just pushed it open a little more. It creaked ever so slightly, and he cursed his luck. Looking down the hall in the direction she went, he couldn't see her. He couldn't hear her either. Seeing a chance at an escape through the window at the end of the hall, he crawled back to the old woman. Very quietly, he whispered his plan. Okay. The window at the end of the hall is wide open. If we can make it, then we can run for it. The old woman was vehemently shaking her head, not liking the idea. We have to. Hey, we have to, he said more harshly. If we stay here, we will die. The old woman bit her lips together and shut her eyes, mentally judging her odds. Figuring there was no other choice, she nodded her head. He nodded back at her and prepared to crawl towards the door, but quickly jumped back against the wall when he heard whistling from down the hall. Again, walking by their room was the girl stained with blood. She was still dragging one of her swords across the ground, but she was swinging the other around as she whistled. She was just about to pass by when the old woman could no longer hold her breath. She exhaled as quietly as she could, but that seemed to be enough for the girl to stop in her tracks. The brown-haired man clamped his hand over her mouth once more. The girl walked back until she was standing in front of the door again. This time, he knew they were found out. Reaching to his right, he felt around for something to use. All he could find was an old umbrella that he held shakily in his hands. The door swung open and he drove the umbrella forward, but it was quickly knocked to the side and the right side of his chest was impaled into the wall behind him. Staring up at her, he was horrified by the mask she wore. It was a traditional Japanese porcelain doll mask complete with the small lips, thin eye holes, and a small nose. The mouth of the mask was smothered in red lipstick and both of the eyes were smudged carelessly in red eyeshadow. Beneath her right eye was a small heart, and along the jawline was the word rotten. I found her, love, she called out with an ominously happy tone. They heard another pair of footsteps casually walking up the stairs. Don't worry, Granny, she said, looking at the old woman. My honey just wants to talk to you. The brown-haired man tried to pull the sword from his chest, but she twisted it more and more, causing him to continue screaming. Then they were greeted to the other masked assailant. He was wearing a blood-red shirt, black pants tucked into black tape with black sandals. Over the red shirt, he wore a black hoodless jacket with a high collar that he left unzipped. The jacket and pants had many pockets on them, and he had an empty sword sheath on his back. His mask was a plain, expressionless white mask that cut off at his hairline. The design of the mask was a blood red, very jagged, and crudely painted on smile that went from cheek to cheek. The eye holes were hardly visible amongst the blacked-out, smudged eyeshadow that covered them. His blood-red hair was slicked back and seemed wet or oily as a strand or two hung over the front edge of his mask. Well, he said, squatting down in front of the terrified old lady. Miss Kibby, former secretary to the Rakeage. The old lady did her best to sink into the wall behind her. Don't be afraid. I would just like to talk to you. My name is unimportant as I am nothing more than an idea. What do you want? Yelled the brown-haired man. The masked man looked over to him in curiosity. Then he looked back to his assailant. Why is he still alive? Sorry, hun. Thought you'd want to use him as leverage. She ripped the sword out of his chest and slit his throat. Flicking the blood off of the blade, she shoved it back into the empty sheath on the masked man's back. The old woman cried in desperation, seeing the blood leak out from his throat. Hey, he said, getting closer to the woman and stroking her face gently. There's no need for that, he whispered to her. Just answer my questions and we'll be all right. Now, the Rakeage, sitting in his office, the Godame Hokage Menma Namikaze, looked over the recent report he received on the masked assailants. It was a cry for help from a second village, this one unexpected. 2 months ago, he received a distress message from the hidden sand villages Kazakage, Gara, about two masked individuals who massacred one of his former associates' homes, apparently fishing for information regarding himself. It was just a simple heads up for the Hokage to ensure all of his associates were accounted for. Now, he received a letter describing the same situation from the new Mizukage, Chojuro. Kiri being a sort of neutral nation of Konoha, it was an unexpected warning. Apparently, the masked assailant allowed one of the witnesses to live to relay a message to him. It was cryptic but threatening and seemed to be in pieces. This entire ordeal was becoming a headache, especially for someone who's only been in office for about 4 months so far. As of now, the issue wasn't that great since the only people out of the village connected to him in any way were Sasuke and Mito. They embarked on their honeymoon a few weeks ago to Spring Country, but they could both pretty much handle anyone they came against. They were of course told to be on the lookout for Naruto even after all this time. There would be hell to pay if the other villages were to find out that the lunatic brother of the Hokage was out and about causing trouble. To Menma's knowledge, he hasn't done anything yet. He was spotted a few times with Ino of all people within a few of the minor villages, but he could never pinpoint their location. It also wasn't known if Ino is an accomplice of his or merely a victim in all this. While his father was in office, he sent multiple search and seize missions out for the two, but only a few were able to spot them but none able to catch them. Without Jiraiya's spy network, finding anyone became a much more difficult task for Konoha. Naruto being a former ANBU did not help as he was well aware of each and every tactic they used for certain missions. He was starting to understand his father's weary warning to him when he took office. He told him that this job was not simply about being the strongest in the village or making the tough decisions. He said it was a very hefty task of balancing not only the problems in and outside of the village, but your own life's issues as well. Naruto's escape influenced both of those tasks negatively. His disappearance led to many issues within the village, including the many demands for his head from not only the council members, but his own group of friends who believed he kidnapped Ino. Even Sakura, to Menma's disappointment. He understood it was her best friend, but Naruto was his brother and he expected her to at least understand how he felt. Ino was his friend too, so he got her point of view. But that didn't change things. As a father, Hokage, and husband, Menma had a lot on his plate. Hopefully in time, everything would work itself out. He was even thinking about going to his father for help with the whole masked assailant thing. Not that he couldn't handle it. He was actually planning on relaying to every shinobi, jonin or higher, to be on the lookout for the two individuals with the orders to either capture or kill. He wasn't sure how effective that would be with the vague description of simply two masked assailants. He wasn't aware of their affiliation, ability, or even gender. It would be like chasing blank faces. For now, his plan was to wait for more information to rise. If things continued the way they were and Kumo or IWA reached out with a similar complaint, then he'd definitely step up and think up a plan of action. A knock at his door broke him from his thoughts. "Come in," he called out, writing something down on the document before him. Sakura walked in with a baby carrier hooked onto her left arm and a diaper bag slung over her right shoulder. Menma smiled and stood up to greet her. Walking over, he gave Sakura a kiss and received the beautiful baby laying carelessly in the carrier. "Hey there, Sumair-chan," he said, pinching her cheeks. Sakura smiled, tickling her little feet. "She's been missing her daddy all day. So, I thought we'd come for a visit." Menma smiled gratefully and walked back to his seat with his daughter in his hands. "Well, I'm certainly glad you did." Taking a seat, he began to rock back and forth, uttering baby noises to make her laugh. "Today has been nothing less than stressful, I'll tell you that." Sakura walked around and set the carrier on the ground next to his chair and the diaper bag on a free spot on his desk. "I can tell. Have you even eaten today?" Menma smiled bashfully with a chuckle. No. I must have forgotten," he said, scratching the back of his head. Sakura chuckled. "You baka. Wait here. I'll go get us something to eat," she said, walking towards the door. Menma chuckled and nodded, holding Sumair up so that they were face to face. "Your Kasan is so mean, Sumair-chan. I hope you're more like me," he mocked so that Sakura could hear. "Don't corrupt my daughter, you baka," she called out casually as she shut the door. Menma again chuckled at her and put his daughter back into the carrier next to him so that he could continue working. When she started crying, he shoved her bottle into her mouth, silencing her instantly. A few minutes later, another knock at his door interrupted him. This time it was Kakashi. "Oh, Kakashi, what is it?" he asked, picking up some ire so that he could feed her properly. "Meh, just stopping by to check up on you," he said, casually strolling in and taking a seat in a chair off to the side with his book in his hands. Menma's expression displayed playful annoyance. "As per my father's request?" he asked him in a knowing tone. Kakashi just smiled from behind his book. Can't blame him for worrying. There was a lot going on when he handed you the hat. Menma sighed and looked down at Samire. "I know, but still. I am Hokage for a reason. He doesn't have to worry about me all the time." Kakashi shrugged. "Guess it's a parent thing." Menma smiled at that, looking down at his daughter, figuring he'd probably do the same thing. "Well, tell him thanks for checking up on me, but I'm fine," he said in amusement. Kakashi smiled and nodded. "Will do. While I'm here, anything you'd like to talk about?" he asked him. Menma looked up in thought. "Well, yeah, actually." He shifted Samire to his other arm. "There could be a possible issue brewing that could possibly affect us later down the road," he said, getting serious. "What's the threat level?" Kakashi asked, putting his book away. Menma shook his head at the question. "I'm not truly sure. 2 masked individuals attacked associates of the Kage demanding information on them," he explained. Kakashi looked up in thought. "What do you mean by associates?" Menma used his free hand to rummage through the piles of paper on his desk. Former sensei of the Kazekage, and the previous Mizukage, Mei Terumi," he said, reading the report. "A former Kage?" Kakashi asked in surprise. Menma nodded his head. "Well, that means that they definitely have some kind of power," he remarked. "Both of them sound as though they would have some kind of knowledge on their Kage's personal life." "That's what I'm afraid of," he said with a nod. "Sasuke and Mito are out on their honeymoon, and you think they would dare attack them? They are both S-ranked shinobi within the bingo book," Kakashi said. Menma nodded. "Yeah, but if they were confident enough to attack a former Kage, I doubt they'd shy away from that," he said. "True," Kakashi said, thinking of all the information presented to him. "Well, maybe we can use that," he said, thinking up a plan. "Yeah. Inform Sasuke and Mito of the imminent threat of 2 masked assailants, and they may possibly be able to defeat them and end whatever the 2 have planned," he explained. "Cut the head of the snake before it can strike." Menma thought it over. It was a sound plan, but he didn't really want to give his sister and new brother-in-law a mission during their honeymoon. Though this was a matter of village security, so he may have to. It would be better to have them vigilant out there if someone were actually planning to attack them. No matter how good of a shinobi you may be, you are still vulnerable to unplanned attacks. The key was to prepare for everything. "Yeah, okay," he said with a nod. "I'll send a carrier pigeon as soon as possible." Wiping the blood from her mask, Ino happily strolled alongside Naruto, who, as usual, had a book shoved in front of his masked face. It's been a year since their escape from the village. Immediately after the whole chemical death initiation thing, they began a string of very confusing missions. It was like Naruto had planned out everything he wanted to do when he got out. Ino knew it was along the lines of malicious intent and most likely criminal activity, but she didn't really care. In fact, she was starting to almost enjoy the things they did. They were bad, but for some reason they gave her a rush she hadn't felt in well ever. Their first 2 months of freedom were spent traveling the various nations, digging up dirt and learning of the brewing alliances among the nations. There seemed to be more than a few. IWA was apparently in contact with Konoha about squashing the recent conflicts between them in place of joining into an alliance with them and Suna. Kiri was still remaining neutral but was very interested in the budding alliances of the other nations. And Kumo was for the most part interested. It almost seemed like the world was nearing a peaceful time. They also dug up the dirt of the underground organizations of each of the nations. Konoha's route was seemingly in conflict with Kumo's Bolt organization. It was all very interesting to Naruto. He and Ino had been plotting their game plan every step of the way. As of recent, they've been hunting down personal information on the Kage themselves. For what? Ino wasn't truly sure, but she knew it would be something. Currently, according to Naruto, they would need an army of their own before beginning their true goal. So, they were now traveling through the fields of Kusagakure in search of something. Or someone. Ino peeked over his shoulder. "Whatcha readin'?" she asked in a playful manner as she slipped her mask back on. "Oh, it's an absolutely dreadful book about this man's ridiculous theory on where we go when we die," he explained. Ino put her hands behind her back and swayed her shoulders as they walked. "What does he think?" Naruto pulled the book down from his face. "Well, he believes there is some sort of purgatory that we go to await our judgment from Kami," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. Ino smiled beneath her mask. "You don't think that place exists?" she asked him, leaning forward to peek into his eye holes. "No," he said immediately. "No, that's just a scare tactic to force people into acting like civilized individuals." "So what happens when we die?" Ino asked him. Naruto sighed and looked up to the night sky and thought. We're just gone. There's no purgatory, no afterlife, no heaven, no hell. There is just non-existence." "So you've never believed in religion?" "No. No, you see, religion is the human race showing its fear of being the top of the food chain. Aside from what people may believe, we are the superior species. Some could argue the tailed beasts, but they have been captured and contained for over a century. We are the most intelligent, and intelligence is power." Ino was confused. "Well, how does that tie in?" "Humanity fears power even though we all crave it. Therefore, they create stories of something a step higher so that everything that happens is, for a reason, in their eyes," he explained. Ino just smiled at him and grabbed his free hand in her own. "You sure have thought about this, haven't you?" She leaned her head against his shoulder as they walked. Naruto chuckled. "Well, when you're locked up for 5 years, it gives you some time to think." "I'm sorry I didn't get you out sooner," she said sincerely. Naruto waved her off. "That is not important. Patience is a virtue. I would have waited another year if I had to." "Well, you didn't have to," she said, hopping onto his back. Effortlessly, Naruto caught her with his hands beneath her knees as he continued walking. "And I am grateful for that," he said as Ino moved the strands of hair hanging over his mask. "Which is why I keep you around." Ino snickered in disbelief. "TCH, yeah. It's not because you love me or anything like that," she said in a playful tone. Naruto chuckled. "Dr. Yamanaka, you are too much." Up ahead, they could see a group of people walking their way. "Looks like we have company, dear," she said, swinging her feet playfully. Naruto just snorted and continued along the path, undeterred. As they got closer and closer, they could make out what seemed to be a 4-man squad, possibly a team of genin and their sensei. Getting even closer, they could now see that they were from Konoha. The sensei was someone neither of them knew personally. It was a fairly muscular man with dark brown hair. His 3 genin stood behind him in fear of the 2 masked individuals they were about to pass. Naruto's eyeholes peered into the brown-haired sensei with absolutely no emotion. In an attempt to maintain his composure, the man gave him a nod. Naruto paused for a slight second before nodding back. Ino was playing with the children behind him, staring at them with a smile beneath her mask. She tilted her head cutely, completely creeping them out with the blood-smeared markings on her mask and the few droplets still clinging to her legs. The sensei and his students breathed a sigh of relief when they passed the 2. Naruto just continued walking, not paying them any more mind. Ino was looking back at them for no apparent reason. The sensei turned around to check on his students and saw her looking back. He pushed them in front of him and continued walking. Ino turned back and chuckled into Naruto's ear. Break. Hours later, Naruto and Ino walked into a bar in the outskirts of Kusa. Sticking to the shadows of the shady place, they made their way to a very dark corner overlooking the people within. They sat there for a few hours until the individual they seemed to be waiting for finally made an entrance. A man with curly black hair and a scar running down his right eye. Naruto nudged Ino and she nodded, taking her mask off. Ino walked over to the free spot on the bar right next to the man, with a sway to her hips and a seductive smile plastered on her face. Leaning on the counter, she tapped her fingers against the countertop. "Hey barkeep, I'd like a few shots," she said, getting the attention of the target. She could feel his eyes on her as she waited for her order. The barkeep came back and asked her how many she wanted, and she replied 2. When he filled the glasses up, the target took that as a conversation starter. "Hey," he quipped. "Those both for you?" Ino smirked his way as if she hadn't noticed him there. "Of course they are," she said slyly. "Girl's a little thirsty," she said, downing one of the glasses with little effort. The curly-haired man watched her the whole time. "Well, in that case, let me buy you 2 more," he said, pulling out his wallet. The barkeep poured 2 more glasses. "I'm Kai." He held his hand out for her to shake. "Ino," she replied, shaking the appendage. She smiled at him, knowing she was successful in her tactics. From there, she laid on the charm to the best of her abilities, which were a lot better than most. She talked him up with small chat that made her want to slit her own throat. He wasn't necessarily dumb, but he was nowhere near the level of intellectual dialect she was used to. For the next 3 to 4 hours, she did well in talking him up and utilized her knowledge of psychology to get the information she needed from him. Somewhere along the way, they decided to leave the bar, with Naruto unknowingly to Kai following close behind. Naruto was spot on with picking this target. Apparently, he was the leader of a very large group of nuke ninja and rogue samurai who despised the major shinobi countries for various reasons. They were a nameless underground circuit that has been around for more than a few years, but had yet to take any major action for what he idiotically admitted to her was cause of his own fear of being found out. Knowing the new information, Ino showed him her headband and expressed her want to join his organization. Kai was at first unsure about it, saying they didn't usually take anyone who wasn't marked nuke in the bingo book. That's when she revealed she was one of the masked assailants that attacked the Kazekage sensei and the previous Mizukage, the 2 cases people were likely aware about at this point. Kai was surprised by that information since those 2 individuals were starting to pop up on everyone's radar. He seemed to have a spy network a lot more complex and functional than the one the Sanin Jiraiya had in the past. Ino found it strange yet fitting that it seemed the only thing holding him back from causing true trouble for the world was his own cowardice. More importantly, she knew more about what Naruto was trying to do. They needed an adequate army, and it would seem as though they found one that could use a new leader. The more Kai explained it, the better it seemed to get. After he agreed she could join, he explained the functioning of the ranking and the members they have. They worked in a fairly organized manner, with higher-ups consisting of the highest-class nuke ninja, who reported information to himself directly. There were over 200 members in Kusa alone at the moment. At least 200 more either undercover or stationed elsewhere. All of them with a deep hatred for one or all of the major villages. Ino continued to lay the charm onto him until he finally decided to take her to the headquarters. On the way, Ino began badgering him about questions of himself. He was sure that he was the most powerful shinobi among their ranks, claiming he had to be to remain in power. Apparently, he was tested by a few high-ranked members before. They were actually notable individuals as well. People Ino had noticed from the bingo books whose bounties were cashed in. The most notable being the puppet master Sasori of Tsunade. Kai instilled fear of his power among his ranks to gain the respect of his people, but he feared he was losing it. The problem was the people wanted action. They wanted something to ensure them that this organization was going to do something soon. Kai, however, was unsure about this. His grandfather was the one to start this many years ago, and it was passed down to him as his father died in service. He was trained by his grandfather ruthlessly, and he admitted to Ino he really had no passion for harming the major villages. He had no reason for it. He was born and raised with the underground headquarters since birth. Ino decided to keep it real. She would give him some advice. "You know, if you don't take action soon, your people won't respect you," she said with a knowing tone. "Or someone may come around and take them from you." Kai smiled bashfully. "Yeah, I know. I don't know, maybe we'll start our own village. We've got a lot of members," he said. Ino shook her head with a hum of uncertainty. "Changing your purpose will make them leave faster." Kai explained he knew this and said he had been working on a way to propose the idea to the forces. He had just been too nervous to actually do it. Ino saw this as an opportunity to possibly take even more action. She pecked him on the cheek with a seductive smile. "They say a strong woman can give a man strengths he never knew he had." Kai looked over to her with a small grin tugging at his lips. "What is it you're proposing, Ms. Ino?" She placed her hand inside his with a bashful smile. "Tell your troops your idea. I'll be with you every step of the way." Kai looked around the forest floor in thought. I don't know," he said timidly. "I'll lose some of them." Ino nodded. "True. But the ones who stay are the ones who are really there for you." She could see the realization and subtle belief in her words play out on his visage. He looked at the ground in front of them as they walked, and he squeezed her hand gently. After a few moments, he looked over to her with a small smile and he nodded. Ino understood the gesture and rested her head on his shoulder. They walked for a few more minutes until they crossed a field. Reaching the other side, he pushed chakra through the ground in a 3-round burst and a pathway opened up, leading underground. They were greeted by someone Ino knew of very well. Deidara Iwa's Mad Bomber. "Kai, another night of bar hopping, huh?" he asked him incredulously. Showing the respect he demanded, he walked right by him with his arm around Ino. "It's Leader-sama to you, and yes, another night of bar hopping." Deidara scowled at the back of his head as he followed the two. "How many men are here?" With a deadpan tone he replied. "Close to 200. "Great, have everyone in the main room. I have an announcement," he said, walking further in with Ino. Naruto was a few paces behind the three, silently watching and casually strolling along, unnoticed. Deidara split away from the two to relay the message. Walking through a corridor, Kai and Ino passed 2 throne-like chairs looking out to what she assumed was the main hall, as there were already more than 100 people scattered around, either training, eating, or just casually talking. The room was absolutely massive, much larger than she assumed it would be. She and Kai walked forward, passing the beautifully sculpted thrones down about 3 steps, onto a small balcony overlooking the room. There were a lot of other corridors lining the sides of the gigantic room with people funneling out, filling the main room within minutes. Ino watched from Kai's side as men and women chatted amongst themselves, waiting for the meeting to start. Below them was a raised and rounded area seeming to be a platform for battle or entertainment. It was connected to a hall directly underneath them. Funneling out of it were 7 people she assumed to be the higher-ups. Individuals such as Deidara Iwa's Mad Bomber, Kisame Hashigaki, the tailless-tailed beast, Heiden, the immortal Aoi Rokishu, the thief of the sword of the thunder god, Zabuza Momochi, demon of Kirigakure, Kakuzu, the man who fought Hashirama Senju, and Pakora, former hero of Tsunade. It was a very lethal group of individuals that Ino found impressive. They were all S-rank criminals with a deep hatred for the major villages. Now, she was actually feeling slightly nervous. If they were faithful to Kai, then this wouldn't work. Squeezing Ino's hand once more, Kai began the announcement. There was a seal placed on the balcony that allowed him to be heard around the entire room. He walked forward and got the attention of the waiting listeners. "People," he said, "I have an important announcement." The entire room was completely drenched in silence, some of them thinking up what they thought he was going to say, most of them hoping they were finally going to do something. "As you all know, the primary goal of this organization has been the destruction of the major villages." He looked back at Ino, who nodded at him with 2 thumbs up and a comically insane-looking smile. He found it weird but ignored it and continued. "As of recent, we've been dormant in our actions." This statement got a wave of chuckles and giddy noises from the crowd, everyone believing they knew where this was going. "I have a plan," he said, getting the people even more excited. Ino could see the eager body language of the 7 higher-ups below them and felt more reassured. They wanted to attack just as much as everyone else. His next statement caused an even greater reaction. "My plan is to abandon our previous objective and instead start our own village." The people were dead silent for a moment, trying to process what he said. When they did, the room erupted into outrageous shouts of anger. Kai watched them yell their discrepancies at him silently for a moment. Flashing his highly intense killer intent, he froze the room almost instantly. Ino was actually surprised by it. She realized he was a lot stronger than she imagined. The 7 higher-ups jumped up to the balcony to demand an answer. Heiden, being the most vulgar, began badgering him immediately. "Kai, what the hell are you talking about?" he yelled incredulously. I didn't waste 3 years of my fucking life to be pulled back into another fucking village. You're a mortal jackass, but he's right, yelled Deidara. The hell is wrong with you? Kai stared at them indifferently with his hands behind his back. We won't be a regular village. He tried to explain. Yeah, no shit. We're made up of missing ninja. Aoi said casually as if he were speaking to an idiot. Zabuza pulled his sword from his back. The only reason we are here is because of the mission, he said, pointing his blade at him. Kai stared at him unintimidated. Oh, Zabuza is gonna challenge him? Kisame said with an amused tone. This is making Shark's skin tremble. Kai walked forward and stared him in the eyes. That mission was started by my grandfather. He was a fool to believe he could take on the likes of the 5 Kage. He said in a threatening way. If you wish to try and take my place, then by all means, he said threateningly. Zabuza couldn't even maintain the eye contact with him. The others could see his sword slowly sinking down out of Kai's face. It was a strange sight for Ino to see, the demon of the mist shying away from an enemy, in front of a fellow swordsman no less. Know your place, Momochi, Kai said, casually stepping past them to continue his speech. The 7 of them turned along with him, seemingly going along with him. I understand the issue with this, but I urge you to allow me to explain, he said, waiting for someone to say something. When they didn't, he continued. The qualms of my grandfather do not extend to me. I have no hatred for the hidden villages, and I understand that you may. If so, I urge you to take it upon yourself to take action in your own way. If your hate is pure, then you will have no issue doing so. Well, if that's not cowardice, then I don't know what is, said a new voice from behind him. The group upon the balcony turned around in surprise at the man brave enough to disrespect this monster before them. Naruto stepped around the thrones with his mask on and his hands behind his back. Ino, who was still behind the group, smirked at Kai, who looked at her in suspicion. She slyly placed her mask back on her head, and when Naruto got next to her, she leaned on his shoulder. Kaio Kutaka, he said slowly. Who are you? Kai asked blankly, showing no fear or emotion of any kind. Naruto tilted his head slightly. It is of no importance who I am. What's important is my plan, and the necessities I need to complete it, he said, casually walking around. You see, like these beautiful people around you, I have a certain abhorrence for the hidden villages. Kai just stared at him in confusion and slight annoyance. Aoi, kill him, he said suddenly. Aoi drew his sword, but Naruto opened his jacket, displaying the paper bombs inside, and formed the hand sign ready to blow them. Shaking his head. Let's not blow this out of proportion. Listen, Kai, as I understand, you are a man who invites challenge. Kai turned his way, staring at him. You wish to challenge me to take my place? He asked him threateningly, flashing his killer intent at the redhead, who was not affected in the slightest. Why, that's a splendid idea, he said with a smile beneath his mask. You see, these people deserve a better leader, he said, addressing the crowd of onlookers listening to the tense conversation. They don't need a spineless man afraid of his own demise. Kai jumped back and off of the balcony, landing on the circular platform, ready to fight. Naruto rolled his right shoulder out and slowly walked forward, paying no mind to the 7 high-classed killers who looked at him as if he were a fool. You will die here today, Kai. It is your fear of death that will be your demise, he said, stepping off the ledge. He landed on the opposite side of the platform, staring across the way at the curly-haired man. You seem so sure of yourself, Kai said with a bit of a smirk. If you had any common sense, you'd look around and see that your confidence may be misplaced. It is not, Naruto said simply, rolling up his left sleeve. He pushed chakra into the marking on his forearm, and a sheathed sword and strap popped up. I am merely aware of the ending to this match. You know nothing of me, but I know everything about you. He strapped the sword to his back and unsheathed it. Kai raised an eyebrow in confusion. Have we met before? Naruto shook his head. No, but I've met you. You're a cowardly man, hiding behind power, he said, holding his sword in a reverse grip. You are too kind for the role you play, which is why you refuse to take action. A man like you does not belong in an organization like this, period. Yet you lead it because no one has been able to best you. And you believe you can? He asked him casually. Naruto gave him a curt nod and said nothing else. Kai nodded back cockily and walked to the edge of the arena. He held his hand out to one of the nearby men, never taking his eyes off of Naruto. Sword. The man pulled it from its sheath and handed it to him. Well then, let's see it. With that, the two rushed forward. Kai went for a wild diagonal slash that Naruto blocked with his own. Spinning with the block, Kai went for an elbow to Naruto's face, but Naruto caught it and pushed it forward, spinning him back the other way. Ducking under the next violent slash, Naruto spun on his knees with his sword out from his body, nearly cutting Kai's leg. Getting to his feet, he jumped back, avoiding the stab from above as Kai lodged his sword into the ground. Pulling it out, he jumped towards Naruto, who had just landed. Naruto fell back to his back as Kai came in for a roundhouse. While his leg was above him, Naruto jabbed him in the spot behind his knee. Kai landed and fell over when his leg gave out. He rolled out the way when Naruto threw his sword down where his chest would have been. The unarmed Naruto rolled forward and caught Kai's wrist before he could continue his slash. He leaned his head out of the way of the right straight and kicked him in the chest, sending him tumbling backwards. Kai stood up on his unresponsive leg and scowled at the redhead. Naruto rushed him and grabbed his sword on the way. He slid on his side, avoiding the bunch of kunai thrown by the curly-haired man. Kai jumped and threw his sword down, hoping to impale the still sliding enemy, but Naruto expertly shifted his body over, missing the blade by a hair. He rolled again, barely missing the ground-breaking stomp that nearly crushed his body. Kai yelled in rage and threw his sword forward, missing the blonde and instead impaling one of the watchers in the head. Naruto looked back momentarily and paid for it when he returned his gaze as Kai was already in his face, delivering a kick to his chest that made him lose grip on his blade. Before he could grab it, Kai jumped up and kicked it away. Naruto took that distraction and grabbed onto his raised leg. He held it until Kai fell back onto his back and kicked him away. They both rolled to their feet and rushed again. Kai slid down, avoiding the flying straight kick as Naruto flew over him. Getting back to his feet, he blocked the redhead's follow-up spinning back kick with ease and delivered a barrage of his own punches into his momentarily exposed ribs. Naruto hopped back and cradled his chest with green chakra emitting from his hands. He didn't have much time as barrage of kunai flew his way. He jumped out of the way and the watchers behind him deflected the blades, suspending them above the platform. Acting quickly, Naruto kicked one forward and grabbed another. The one he kicked forward was caught by Kai, who was already rushing him. Naruto parried his strike with a slash of his own. The two were deadlocked in a struggle of strength. Hand in hand, kunai and kunai. Kai peered into the black eye holes, faintly seeing the cold, lifeless blues staring back at him. Loosening his wrist, Naruto allowed Kai's kunai to soar towards himself, stabbing him in the shoulder as he plunged one into his thigh. Arg! Kai yelled, kicking him back with his other leg. Naruto rolled with the hit and stood back to his feet, now fresh out of weapons. Kai was now limping as he struggled to stay on his feet. Naruto rushed him, ignoring the injury to his shoulder. He engaged him, throwing a feint right hook that Kai leaned back to avoid. When he did, Naruto jabbed him in his injured thigh. Arg! He yelled again, dropping down to his knee. Naruto stood over him as if he already won. His breathing was steady and he didn't seem as though he even fought yet, other than the blood leaking from the hole in his shoulder. Kai's eyes were traveling around the room, looking at the people who were looking at the spectacle in shock. No one said a word, they just watched on in disbelief. This is the peak performance of your so-called unstoppable leader? He asked in a condescending way. Not bad, but I have definitely had better battles. Kai chuckled and stood back to his feet. Oh, believe me, I've got a lot more, he said as he started to walk back into the tunnel. Naruto raised his eyebrow, wondering if he had given up. Close combat is not my forte. If you'd really like a battle, we should take it outside. Naruto watched him for a second before following. Break! The hefty group of people now circled around the field outside of their hidden base. Everyone trying to cram around to see the fight. It had been so long since they witnessed their leader go all out, and it would seem he would have to if he wanted to win this fight. When everyone settled in, the field was completely quiet aside from Ino, who was sharpening Naruto's discarded blade off to the side with the 7 higher-ups. Naruto stood calmly on the other side of the field, waiting for Kai to do whatever it is he believed would win him this fight. Kai was still trying to get used to the pain in his leg by bouncing on the balls of his feet a few times. With a sigh, he stopped. He pulled his shirt off, revealing a body riddled with tattoos all kinds. He looked over at Naruto, who was as unintimidated as he had been the whole time. "I am finished with this game of cat and mouse," he said with conviction in his voice. "You wish to lead my people. I will not make it easy for you." Naruto said nothing. He took off running across the field, intent on continuing their battle. A few feet away from him, he jumped to his left, dodging the ball of flames headed his way, immediately being forced to move again as another one came soaring towards him. Using his limited knowledge of earth jutsu, he slammed his hands into the ground and a wall shot up in front of him, barely standing up against the ball of flames that collided with it. Kai watched the smoke clear away for a brief second before jumping up and away from the hands that popped out trying to snag his feet. Naruto jumped out of the ground and began rushing him again, performing a string of hand signs along the way. Kai blew another fireball his way, which Naruto jumped over. Seeing this, Kai blew another one, but Naruto had finished his hand signs and blew a ball of water bigger than Kai expected, dousing his flame and coating the field in a thick mist. Kai jumped from the mist, not wanting to be caught in a trap. He stared into the cloud of white, awaiting some kind of movement. A shot of an air bullet tore through the mist too quickly for Kai to avoid completely, so he leaned out the way, slightly causing the bullet to shoot through his arm. Grimacing at the pain, he jumped out of the way of the next two, avoiding them narrowly. Naruto went through even more hand signs and blew a ball of flames at the curly-haired man. When Kai jumped away to avoid it, Naruto smirked beneath his mask, pulling at the thin ninja wire in his hands. Kai noticed the wire just in time and contorted his body clear of being tangled in it. In doing so, he didn't notice the redhead come in with a brutal knee to his rib cage, sending him tumbling back down to the ground. He held his ribs and looked up at the two redheads who began walking towards him. He looked around at the people that were giving him the same look they were before, the look that told him he was losing. In truth, this was all he had. This man before him was too powerful. The people feared his almighty strength because he was able to easily beat Sasori, but in truth, he had help in doing so. It would seem he needed that help here as well. He stood up with a very intense look in his eyes. He took a few steadying breaths before he rolled his shoulders out. With a somewhat painful expression, a tattoo on the back of his neck began to glow an orange, almost red color and began to expand. Like markings of flames, it began expanding across his body rapidly, stopping just past his nose, almost reaching his other eye. The orange faded to black and the markings looked like regular tattoos. He felt amazing. Naruto watched him in interest. "I knew you were a snake," he said lowly, crouching down lower into his fighting stance. Kai's eyes lit up in excitement. The power within him was overbearing but incredible. With a crazy look in his eyes, he took off. Chapter 10. Charging in, Naruto jumped over the barrage of kunai that flew faster than they had previously. When he landed, Kai was already in his face. He leaned to the right to avoid the fist flying towards his face. He immediately had to block the follow-up right that shook his body. Kai spun around and delivered a brutal kick to his stomach, sending him skipping across the ground a few yards. Naruto rolled back to his feet and tried to lean out of the way of the roundhouse coming to his face, but it was too late. He took the hit and was once again sent skipping across the ground. Kai stood in his spot with the black markings still covering his body. Naruto picked his mask up enough to spit the blood from his mouth. Standing back to his feet, he rolled his neck out and rushed again. Kai rushed as well. When in range, he went for a right hook that Naruto sunk under and delivered a jab directly beneath his extended bicep. Kai grimaced and kneed him in the side. Naruto rolled with the hit immediately and jumped into a 360 to avoid the low kick directed at his knees. In his spin, he brought a fist out that connected brutally with Kai's chest. The two got back to their feet and traded another series of blows until Naruto's superior speed allowed him to gain the upper hand. Kai rolled to his back and kicked himself back up. He leaned back, avoiding the roundhouse kick that almost took his head off. When he righted himself, he lunged forward, giving Naruto a shoulder charge that threw him off balance. With an opening, he gave a spinning back kick to his side, sending him again tumbling across the field. Naruto rolled out of his tumble and leaped as hard as he could to his right, avoiding the much more potent ball of flames heading his way. When he landed, he saw Kai performing more hand signs. He awaited his next move. Kai finished his string of seals and put his hands out to the side. Miraculously, 2 whips made of flames shot out from his hands. Naruto was still unfazed. Kai swung one around above his head and snapped it towards Naruto. Naruto rolled out of the way of it and immediately had to jump to avoid the other one that swung just underneath him. He allowed himself to fall to the ground, avoiding the next one that swung right over top of him. Then he rolled across the ground, avoiding the next strike coming straight down at him. Acting quickly, he rolled to a crouch and slammed his hands against the ground, causing another wall of earth to shoot up in front of him. Kai sent both of the whips around either side, trying to hit him from within his cover. To his surprise, he heard him pop out of the ground from a few feet behind him. Turning around, he saw him going through hand signs. Kai snapped his whip towards him in an attempt to cut his jutsu. Naruto jumped to the side to avoid it. When he landed, he stumbled, almost losing his footing. Kai took the chance and swung both of his flame whips his way. Before they could hit, however, they dispersed without his doing. He tried to bring them back, but they refused to manifest again. "What the hell?" he muttered, running through the hand signs again. As he was doing that, the onlookers were watching in both amusement and amazement as the real Naruto stood directly behind their former leader, having just gently placed a seal on his back. It was a remarkable thing to see their seemingly all-powerful leader being made to look like a fool. Borrowed power makes you weak when it is no longer within your reach, Naruto said, casually, alarming Kai. He quickly jumped off to the side, facing off against Naruto and his clone. "What the hell did you do?" Kai asked darkly. He grabbed at his neck as his curse seal began retracting. Naruto began walking casually towards him and dispelled his clone. "I have cut your contact with that seal upon your neck," he said as everyone else grew confused. "A gift from Orochimaru, I assume," he said casually, further shocking the crowd. Up to this point, they had assumed it was simply a technique of his that involved some kind of boost in his abilities. "So, you've seen it?" Kai asked, rolling his body out, now that he would have to fight without it. Naruto shrugged, his pace never changing as he stalked towards him, as calm as he's been the entire fight. Once before, Kai couldn't admit it, but he was a little scared at this point. This is exactly what he had been so afraid of. He feared his death before he was ready. All this time, he held his army back for fear of the Kage taking action upon him and ending him. Now, in an ironic turn of events, his fear of death from the Kage had led to his much more humiliating death at the hands of a man he didn't even know. It was a laughable death for a spineless leader. When Naruto came into his vicinity, Kai threw a basic punch his way, in an effort to fight to the end. Without the curse seal, he could now feel his injury, so he had a very wobbly base that killed him in this situation. Naruto caught the fist with ease and held it in place, staring him in the eyes. "All that power you claim to have, and this is all you could put up?" he asked, amplifying his voice to further humiliate the man in front of his army of onlookers. "If you were a lesser man, I'd excuse your childish boasting," he said, snapping his arm with a violent flick of his wrist. "But you are a supposed all-powerful, fearless leader." Kai looked around at the onlookers, noticing the faces of absolute disappointment, amazement, and hope. He was losing his people. They weren't here for him because he wasn't there for them. Everything his father fought and died for, everything his grandfather created had gone to waste because of his cowardice. He wobbled on his feet a bit before using his remaining good hand to take another swing at him. Naruto punched Kai in the throat before he could even completely throw his punch. Kai's hand instantly retracted to his throat. Naruto watched him for a second, tilting his head in wonder at the vehemently coughing man. He then jabbed him in his shoulder, causing his last remaining arm to fall limp to his side. It is men like you that truly disgust me. Kai, he said, spitting his name out in a mocking way. Kai glared at him and for whatever reason attempted a headbutt. Naruto just sent a sharp jab, breaking his nose. When Kai lifted his head back in order to both soothe the pain with no hands and stop the bleeding, Naruto spun around and delivered a brutal back kick to his exposed kneecap, dropping him to his knees. It is men like you, he said, again amplifying his voice, that eat away at the fiery passion of the scorned for your own selfish gains. In truth, if you were honest with your people, they'd know the true reason for your so-called new plan. Naruto once again mocked, air-quoting the last two words. Kai spit the blood from his mouth, but couldn't speak with his crushed windpipe. People, he said, pacing around and addressing the crowd of onlookers. This man that you have also graciously devoted your services to has had no intentions of fulfilling the acts he has promised. He stopped his pacing and placed his hands behind his back. He bounced on the balls of his feet in an almost amusing childlike manner. You see, Kai here, he gestured to him. Kai fears death. The crowd of onlookers were looking on in confusion. Of course, I know what you're thinking. Naruto continued, starting up his pacing once again. Everybody fears death. It's only natural, he said, speaking for them, basically summing up what it was swimming through their heads. But, ladies and gentlemen, you must believe me when I say that no man has ever changed the world with a fear of death holding him back. No man has liberated an oppressed nation with the strings of death securing his feet to the cliff of safety. It's preposterous to believe in a leader who is not willing to give his life for his own cause, he said. The surrounding men and women were muttering amongst themselves. Naruto couldn't tell if he was winning them over or not, but he was determined to drive his point home. From the looks of you, I just know there is a passion for the cause. I can tell you people want retribution for the true evil of this world. Most of you, I'd assume, view that as the major villages, he said, receiving more than a few chuckles and murmurs of agreement. Naruto nodded to them. Believe me, I get it. But, listen to me now. Your hatred is misplaced. The crowd was silent, intent on listening to what he had to say. The major villages are merely victims to the chaotic clutches of the established order. Order that has been instilled by the brutality of many years of war. Ino stood behind the group of the 7 elites, watching their body language and noticing the subtle signs that Naruto was slowly winning them over. So far, it already looked like Zabuza and Kisame were on board, if their nod of agreement towards each other was anything to go by. The villages are victims, yes, but the Kage are the perpetrators. At this, the people actually cheered a bit, clapping lightly in acceptance of his words. The unspoken truth of the matter is that they are the guardians of the modern standards of civilization, the ones that hold the leash upon men and women who seek something more, who seek a future of equality among us all. The crowd returned to their murmuring, apparently trying to discuss amongst themselves if Naruto was telling the truth. I too seek this future, and I can assure you, I am more than willing to die for such a cause. I can almost guarantee that I may when this is all over. But if I am to die in the process of exposing these false gods for what they truly are, I want my actions to mean something. In order to do this, I am in need of an army, he said. I need an army willing to fight and die for the cause, just as I am willing to do the same. No one said a thing as they just stood there. That is my purpose, he said casually. I don't want to kill them, he said, shaking his head. No, that's too easy. There's no pain in death. I want to humiliate them. I want to strip them of everything they hold dear and make them understand me. They have to understand that they are the antagonists. To everyone's surprise, Pakora stepped forward. How do we know you're not just blowing smoke like Kai? She asked daringly. Naruto turned to her and slowly paced towards her. Because, unlike Kai, I have a vendetta. I have a mission that I will complete, if not with an army then by myself. Unlike Kai, he said, once more kicking the still immobile man over so that he was laying on his back. I do not fear death. I don't fear the Kage. Unlike Kai, I have real power. Real power, huh? Asked Aoi, stepping forward alongside Pakora. You didn't look like much to me. Kai was just a lot weaker than I had imagined. If I had known, I would have killed him myself. If you wish to take his place, then you will have to fight me for it, Naruto said casually. Everyone could tell Aoi was afraid, but for some reason he stepped up to the plate. Pakora saw the coming battle and stepped back to watch. Everyone knew Aoi was strong, so if this man could hold his own against him, then there was some merit to his words. Aoi drew his sword and stared across at his opponent. Naruto just stood in his spot, undeterred by the fabled sword. Aoi waited with bated breaths, hoping Naruto would make the first move. When he didn't, it only boosted Aoi's confidence that he wasn't as strong as he led on. He took off in a sprint, determined to end this quickly. When he made it to the masked redhead, he swung his sword wildly and Naruto sidestepped it. Aoi was thrown off balance and stumbled forward. Naruto caught him in a chokehold and with absolutely no effort began closing his windpipe. Aoi tried to free himself by stabbing at Naruto over his head, but a clone he didn't see him make plucked the sword from his hands. I was lenient with Kai because I wanted to see what he could do, Naruto said eerily so that everyone could hear. You, however, are quite famous for your prowess, so I have no need for a prolonged battle. With that being said, everyone was shocked beyond belief when he spun his neck completely around with no effort at all. The crowd of people were all stunned in silence. Even the remaining 6 members couldn't believe it. They had all sparred with Aoi at one point, so they knew he wasn't that easy to take down. Or he shouldn't have been. Naruto picked up the discarded sword of the Thunder God and walked around the field until he spotted something. He walked over to the man that had lent his weapon to Kai. I do believe you are in need of a new blade, he said, handing it over to him. The man was absolutely stunned to have received such a famous blade. The onlookers themselves were stunned to see someone hand a relic of that magnitude over so willingly. As if it were a casualty thing, Naruto just went back to addressing the crowd. Believe me when I say I have the strength to carry out my ideals. I have the knowledge of how to do it. I have the unquenchable drive to see it through. All I need is an army willing to do so as well. Everyone looked around at each other, weighing their odds. If you are still not convinced, I am willing to take any of you on to prove my point, he said daringly, mainly directing his statement at the remaining 6 higher-ups. To everyone's surprise, Deidara stepped forward. Naruto eyed him suspiciously, expecting him to attack. To everyone's surprise, he kneeled and bowed his head. Gasps and murmuring erupted around the area. Everyone watched on as Kisame and Zabuza joined him. Then Heiden and Kakuzu, and finally Pakora, who was now convinced. Seeing their higher-ups bow to a man that had just defeated their previous leader, slowly the 200 men and women began dropping down, bowing before the man who had promised action against the Kage. Ino walked over happily to him, skipping a few times in a childish manner. Looks like we have our army, hun, she quipped happily. Naruto smiled and wrapped an arm around her waist. Looks like we do. Any news? Menma asked as Kakashi walked into his office. The message of warning had been sent out to Sakura and Sasuke a week ago. They were due back in a few more days. Kakashi scratched the back of his head. Meh? Sasuke and Mito responded with some mighty big news, he said, casually plopping down on the chair in front of his desk. What is it? He asked him cautiously. Did they run into the masked individuals? Kakashi stopped him before his string of questions ran wild. No, nothing like that, he said, waving him off. It's a bit more personal. Menma shook his head in confusion. He didn't understand what he was getting at. Kakashi rolled his eye. Mito's pregnant. Menma sat back in his seat in surprise. She's pregnant? He asked with a smile slowly creeping onto his face. Wow, now I'm gonna be an uncle, he yelled out, pumping his fist in the air. Father, Hokage, and uncle, he said to himself. Yup, impressive rap sheet, Kakashi remarked from behind his book. Menma was all teeth. Are you not excited? He asked him in amusement. Kakashi shrugged. Well, there's more news. I just wanted to give you the good before the bad, he said dangerously. Menma sat up in his seat ready to listen. Well, I'm waiting on one more person who needs to hear this, he said. What does it pertain to? Menma asked, now getting a bit worried about what he was about to say. Kakashi just stared at him and shook his head as if telling him he couldn't say it without saying all of it. Menma just leaned back in his seat, his mind running circles thinking about what it could be. Had Sasuke been killed? Had they been captured? Had Naruto died or something? He wasn't certain, but he just had a feeling he knew who was on their way. Sure enough, his father came in, raising his worry. If his father was here, then it definitely pertained to either Sasuke and Mito or Naruto. He wouldn't be too thrilled about either of them. Kakashi? What is it? Asked Minato, taking the other seat. He only nodded at Menma, who nodded back. If Kakashi took it upon himself to actually call him out for something, he knew it was something big. He and Menma stared at the dazed-looking silver-haired man waiting for him to say it. With a sigh, Kakashi rubbed the back of his neck. There was word from Kiri. We sent word for a more detailed description of the two masked assailants. He said with a heavy tone. Menma and Minato stared at him with an uneasy feeling welling up. Somehow they both knew. We know who it is. Don't tell me, Minato said, shaking his head and dropping his gaze down to the floor. He didn't even want to hear it. It's Naruto, isn't it? Menma asked timidly. Kakashi didn't respond, but his silence said enough. Menma shook his head and sighed. Now what? He's attacked 2 nations already. There was no leniency for that. If the other villages were to find out, they'd demand his head immediately. Well, Suna and Kiri at least. Kumo and IWA, to his knowledge, had no issues with the masked individuals. Then the issue of it being Ino with him, that was another headache. Now it was certain she was no victim in this. She was his accomplice and the most likely way he escaped. What now? Minato asked. He couldn't believe it. His name was already tarnished as is, but now with having attacked 2 nations, no one would dispute it. Naruto Namikaze was no longer salvageable. What's worse, his actions could cause more problems for Konoha. For Menma especially. Kakashi shrugged his shoulders. Menma, I know this puts you in a tight spot, he said, drawing his attention. But if it comes to it and Naruto becomes a major problem for Konoha and the other villages, then you must be Hokage first and his brother second. Both Menma and Minato understood what he was saying. Menma immediately wanted to dispute that, but how could he? Minato's heart ached, but he understood what he was saying. If Naruto was truly set in his ways, then he would have to be put down before he hurt anyone else. It hurt him more knowing that he was partially responsible for what his son had become. Kakashi, I couldn't possibly. Menma began. Minato butt in before he could finish. He's right. Menma was completely shocked by that statement. Tsunade, had he really just agreed to kill his own son? How could you even say that? Minato shook his head sadly. Menma, Naruto is not well. And if he's running around killing people, we may have no other choice but to put him down. Menma sat back in his seat again, his heart shattering within his chest at the mere thought of having to do such an unspeakable act. Believe me, I know how you feel, but if it comes to it, it just has to be done. What if we find him before he does more damage? Menma asked, trying to find a way around this. Kakashi and Minato shared glances with each other. I mean, we're the only ones who know who he is, so if we could find him and Ino before then, we could probably take them back undetected. Kakashi sighed. Menma, it doesn't work like that, he said, scratching his head. Even if we did get him back, he'd be thrown in a prison immediately, or worse. Well, what's a better option? He asked in frustration. What? Just kill him? Minato sat up in his seat. Menma, there are just things that must be done. I doubt Naruto would even let us take him alive. What do you mean, let us? I'm sure with me, Kakashi, and Sasuke there wouldn't be much he could do. Menma responded, letting slip a bit of his arrogance. Kakashi wasn't as confident. Menma, do not underestimate him. He looked much more serious than they were comfortable with. I can't explain it, but this is not the time for arrogance. Menma shook his head in confusion. Kakashi, I said me, you and Sasuke. Kakashi just shook his head. Just don't take him lightly, Kakashi said, looking down at his own foot. Naruto, Ino, and the 6 higher-ups sat within a room with a round table. Ino was on Naruto's lap with her bare feet propped up on the table as she stroked his hair. Naruto and the others were speaking of Naruto's plan, or as much as he was willing to tell them. What was the estimation? Naruto asked, directing his statement towards Pakora. She shuffled through a few papers. About even all around. About 50 for Konoha, 40 for Kiri, 45 for Suna, 40 for Kumo, and 50 for IWA. Naruto nodded as he absent-mindedly rubbed his hand against Ino's exposed thigh. Well, if I were to guess for you lot, I'd say you Pakora are definitely leaning towards Suna. Deidara without a doubt IWA. Zabuza and Kisame Kiri, and that just leaves Konoha and Kumo. He continued to rub Ino's leg in thought. Well, in any case, everyone will have the choice of which village they decided to lead their attack on. If there are any shortages, we will have to balance it out with willing individuals. When is this whole attack business happening anyways? Asked Deidara. Naruto tilted his head up in thought. Well, immediately of course, he said casually. No beating around the bush. Although I am a patient man, I have been waiting for many years. Now is the time. If we allow that alliance of theirs to solidify, it will only make our task a lot harder. He said casually. Well, there are 8 of us here. First things first, we must first take our incentive. He said darkly, confusing them all. Yay! Sounds like fun. Ino quipped happily, wrapping her arms around Naruto's neck. Flying atop of his explosive clay bird, Deidara stared down menacingly at the village below. Familiar streets he knew all too well, with maroon flags waving proudly upon every building. It had been so many years since he's been here, and it was so technologically advanced. TV's new stores he had never heard of, it was impressive. It'll look even better in rubble. His hatred for this place stemmed from their mistreatment of him in his younger years. In IWA, you were either born fortunate enough to survive on your own, or you were handed over to the military for either experimentation or early training. With both of his parents vanishing, he was handed over to them and subjected to the former. His eyes caught a glimmer of something in the outskirts of the village. He tossed down another of his flying creations, which swooped down to the spot. Moments later, the bird returned with a blood-splattered Heiden on its back. Heiden, did you get the information? He asked. Heiden nodded, licking the blood from off the edge of his sickle. Oh, you bet your fucking ass I got it. Man, this is the most fun I've had in years, he yelled out, looking down at the village he had no quarrel with. In truth, he just enjoyed destruction. All around destruction. They had left right after the meeting. Naruto had explained a condensed version of his plan to the entire army and had them divide themselves based on which village they decided to attack. He explained that they were to wait at the base, getting as much training in as possible until they were called to action. The higher-ups left for their assignment of sending a message. Everyone had their task in mind and were determined to do it. They had more than a few objectives they were told they must complete before returning. There was a spark that was ignited within them all now that they were actually taking action. When their new leader said he had a goal, he was definitely not one to beat around the bush to make it happen. After only a week, they were already taking action. Deidara chuckled as he mentally ordered the birds to take them up into the cover of the clouds for the time being. His eyes staring intently at the setting sun, waiting for it to be swallowed by the horizon. Standing atop a very high cliff overlooking their previous home, Kisame and Deidara readied their blades. Kisame had a very excited grin on his face, and Zabuza's was set in a nonchalant manner. Oi! This sure brings back memories, doesn't it? Kisame asked, peering over at the man. Zabuza just rolled his shoulders out. Ah, he said in reply with a small nod. It's been a while since we've actually fought together, he said, looking back to him. Kisame's grin widened. And what better way to get back at it than against our own home? He finished with a chuckle at his own joke. His shark skin sword was already purring in excitement. Kisame had a dark history with this place. He refused to admit that he at one point admired their psychotic Kage who was intent on destroying bloodlines. Ironic given his unusual mutation. So, you want to grab the kid? Or me? Zabuza chuckled. It'd be dead before its use ran out if I let you do it, he said in amusement, You just handle the distraction. Kisame grinned wider, displaying his sharp teeth. Zabuza's eyes dazed over, staring at the gentrified village he had left behind all those years ago. It was almost sickening how peaceful it seemed as the last time he was there. It was nothing more than a stain upon the elemental nations. The last time he was there, the war had taken the last bit of life he had left in him, killing the child he had taken under his wing just a few years prior. That was his vendetta. That's what brought him to Kai, who promised the vengeance he sought. He wanted the village to suffer the way they made him suffer all his life. From his blood-filled academy days to his last few years of service. He wanted them to suffer for all of it, and now, with the help of their new leader, they finally would. So, you trust him? He asked the blue-skinned man to his right. Kisame looked over at him to ensure he understood the question. It's been a week and we're already attacking, he said as if there was no question. Zabuza nodded. Yeah, but there is something else, I know it. He's got some other objective he's not telling us. Kisame shrugged. If we get the revenge we need, I don't care what he's planned. Zabuza just nodded and looked out to the horizon. The sun was almost down, it wouldn't be too long now. Standing on a giant sand dune, two beautiful women, one green-haired and impressively muscular, the other a dainty-looking blonde who was bouncing on the balls of her feet in excitement. Oh, I can't wait to work with you. Ino chirped happily, looking over at the stony-faced woman. Pakora looked over to her, just mentally wondering what the hell was wrong with this psycho. She was far too happy for someone who had killed a group of genin on their way here. Dido. In truth, the mask creeped her out as it seemed to match the girl's tone of voice, misleadingly sweet. Do you want to grab the package, or would you rather be the distraction? Ino asked her. Pakora just shrugged her shoulders. For whatever reason, something inside of her was telling her she did not want to get on this girl's bad side. It wasn't just because of her boyfriend being her leader either. It was something that was just screaming that this girl was far more dangerous than she let on. It's up to you. Great! She quipped happily as she clapped her hands. I'll be the distraction. I get to use my new toys. Pakora wasn't sure, but she knew it wasn't something she would have liked to face if she were on the other side of this attack. Had it not been for a few bad events, she may have been on that other side. Luckily for her, the higher-ups hated her for what she was and they tried to kill her. That was their first mistake. After 2 years of following Kai, Pakora was losing hope in her ever having the revenge she so desperately wanted. Now, with the directing of Naruto and a firm plan set in action, it was finally time. What they did was unforgivable and she refused to let them get away with it. Turning to the horizon, there was still a bit of time before their attack was due to take place. In an effort to dig up some kind of feel for her new leader, understand their relationship, and get used to the blonde's personality, she started a conversation. So, what's Leader Sama's deal? She asked casually. Ino looked over to her in confusion. Are you asking me about my honey? She asked in an almost threatening way. Pakora noticed and quickly defused whatever deranged thoughts she may be having. And no, I was just trying to understand who he is, she said quickly. Ino gave her a very unsure look from beneath her mask. Well, don't get any ideas, lady. And you don't need to understand who he is. What is he? Your husband, soon to be, she said happily, placing her hands together and tilting her head in a cute way. Pakora was weirded out but continued anyways. Well, who is he? Under that mask. Ino looked at her eerily for a few seconds. You don't need to know who he is. This time it was definitely said in a threatening way. It's almost sundown, get ready. Pakora was alarmed by how hostile she seemed to turn all of a sudden. She turned away and prepared for the mission. Standing on a lower mountain, Naruto and Kakuzu awaited the fall of the sun. It was almost time for them to attack. It was decided that Kakuzu would take the role of the distraction as Naruto was much more stealthy and deadly within close proximity, which is where their target resided. The sun was a sliver away from being completely consumed by the horizon. It's time, he said to Kakuzu, who simply nodded and followed him as they jumped towards the bridge to Kumo. Naruto looked up and the sun was almost non-existent. As soon as darkness takes over, began the assault. He ordered. Kakuzu said nothing as his body began to bubble and his sticks began to come apart. 4 of the masks connected to his body shot out and created bodies of their own. He nodded to his red-headed leader, who nodded back to him. "It will take no longer than 20 minutes, he said as he jumped off the side of the bridge, intent on taking a different path. Kakuzu watched the last ray of sunshine slowly disappear until it was completely gone. Wordlessly, the creatures on his back sprinted towards the entrance to the mountainous village with the only purpose of causing as much damage as possible for 20 minutes. He jumped onto the back of his creature containing the infinity of fire element and they shot into the air. While there, he went through hand signs and blew an enormous ball of flames at the busiest section of the village he could see. The people had no time to react and were burnt to a crisp. Within seconds, the shinobi within the surrounding area were on him, demanding what he was attacking for. He remained silent and continued to wreak havoc upon the citizens of Kimogakure. Using chakra, Naruto clung to the bottom of the Raikage's office. He waited closely to the nearest open window, listening for his chance to enter. He could feel the vibrations of Kakuzu's attacks, so he knew the Raikage could feel it too. "What was that?" yelled a fairly drowsy-sounding voice from within the office called out. He could hear a few footsteps charging towards his office. "Raikage-sama!" another male voice yelled, this one much more urgent sounding. "We're under attack." Naruto could hear the Raikage's chair slide out. "All right," he said. "Samui, take Riwi into the vault. You'll be safe." "Okay. You better come back, Darui." After that brief yet heartfelt commotion moment, Naruto heard a heavy door shut and footsteps charging back down the hall. Slowly, he crawled up to the open window. Climbing in, he looked around suspiciously, making sure no one was around. When he was certain, he walked further in slowly. He could hear small pouts and reassuring whispering from somewhere. Turning his head, he grew alarmed when he saw the Hachibi form near the front of the village. That means Kumo's Jinchuriki were still in town. At least one of them. He had to be quick. Going up to the vault, he knocked on the door. From within, the woman called out to him timidly. "Didish, Darui?" Naruto did his best impression of the man he had just heard a few minutes ago, adding a bit of labored breathing to make it real. "Samui." Sme opened the door. "We have to leave now." "Daddy? What's wrong?" a child's voice called out. "Riwi, everything's okay. We have to go now," he said with the same level of urgency. He could hear Samui urgently trying to open the door, and he tapped the door as if he couldn't contain himself. Samui was shocked to see someone other than Darui. She stepped in front of her son with a kunai in hands. "Who are you?" she demanded dangerously. "I'd love to fight you, but I am afraid I am pressed for time. If you'd believe me, I'd rather not hit a woman in front of her son," he said casually. Samui's fight or flight syndrome was kicking in, and the only thing on her mind was the will to save her son. She rushed forward, slashing at the assailant, but Naruto grabbed her wrist, spun her around and delivered a sharp chop to the back of her head, putting her to sleep. Then, he was left staring across at the 5-year-old dark-skinned boy looking at him in fear. Chapter 11. Flying above the silent village, Deidara and Heiden watched the horizon. As soon as the last sliver of light ate itself, Deidara dropped the strange-looking creature from his hand. As they watched it fall to the ground, Heiden leaped from his own bird towards the target they were told to retrieve. Deidara just watched on as his creature suddenly expanded into a very huge blob of white that looked like an incredibly obese bird. Before it even hit, he could hear the screams and a small smile teased on his face. When his creation impacted, there was nothing but silence. Then a flash of light blinded him momentarily, followed by a booming explosion that he could feel from his bird. He smiled, seeing Ninja rally to the point of impact to recover survivors. Jerking his hands forward, he threw out 2 more creations, both of which expanded into different creatures that shot forward like missiles in a nosedive straight for the bulk of the people. No longer needing cover, he swooped down on his clay bird and began throwing out smaller creatures that still packed more than enough bang to decimate a target and then some. He swiveled and swerved away from the pitiful jutsu thrown his way as he continued attacking shinobi and civilian alike. He jumped off of his clay bird just as 2 earth spears impaled it. Quickly, he created another and looked towards the origin of the attack. he saw none other than the Yandame Tsukikage herself, Kuratsuchi. Deidara grinned and dodged her next barrage of rock missiles, countering with a barrage of his clay creatures. Break! Heiden used his sickle to climb up the side of the mountain. When he made it to the top, he ducked down in the bushes as a group of individuals were being escorted towards a shelter away from the village by two Chunin. The two ushered the group into a cave and prepared to shut it with a boulder. Before they could do so, Heiden had decapitated one of them with a clean strike with his sickle. The other one he only managed to nip his arm. Sadly for the unaware man, that was all he needed. Performing hand signs, his body turned black and the outline of an apparent skeleton appeared over his skin. He pulled a black rod of some kind from somewhere on his form and impaled his own heart. The man grabbed at his pouring injury and Heiden turned to the cave. With his sickle dragging behind him, he strolled casually inside. When there, he could see a few wealthy-looking civilians, and a few who seemed to have been luckily close when the attack began. The people gasped at the sight of him as they could just tell he was an enemy. "Good evening, ya pompous pricks," he said with a strangely excited tone. "I am here to retrieve someone important," he said casually. "Since this seems to be the VIP bunker, I just know she's here." He clicked his tongue in thought as he casually paced back and forth, looking into the fear-riddled eyes of everyone there. He seemed much creepier as he just ignored the rumbles and booms of explosions in the distance. Feeling the tension getting to them, a middle-aged man wearing expensive-looking clothes tried to make a run for the exit. Being the closest to the mouth of the cave, he felt he had it. Before he took more than 2 steps, Heiden's sickle impaled him through the back. The bottom blade pierced directly through his chest and the second sliced through the base of his neck, protruding out the front of his face, leaving the top blade dug within the very top of his skull. He said, waving his finger as he continued looking around. "Can't have you fuckers leaving on me now. Not that I couldn't let you go. I just don't want to." His eyes stopped on a woman nearing her early 20s with long brown hair and green eyes. She looked to be a fairly rich girl and exactly who he was looking for. "Ah," he said, stepping around the people to get to her. "Makatsuchi?" he asked. The girl quickly shook her head no and pushed back further, trying to sink into the rock behind her. Her eyes were darting everywhere, trying to focus on something else, hoping he would leave her alone. Heiden could tell she was lying and he could have just taken her, but he decided to have a bit more fun. "Well, that's really too bad," he said, standing up. Everyone else was afraid to move, so no one else tried to dash for the door. Heiden leaned his sickle against his shoulder. "I guess I'll just have to start killing people until I find out who Makatsuchi is," he said with a shrug. He turned to the man closest to the exit, other than the one he had already killed. The man saw his intention and tried scrambling away. "And no, it's her and oh!" he yelled before Deidara cut his head clean from his body. The others screamed in horror at seeing it roll across the floor. He looked around for an answer to his unasked question. With a chuckle, he held his hands out. "Really? No one? Not a single person moved? Well, fuck me. I thought you people cared," he said, shaking his head. "How inhumane." As he was saying this, he brought his weapon up again and prepared to bring it down on the next individual, which, to everyone's horror, happened to be the previous victim's shell-shocked son. Not even 10 years old. "Wait!" yelled a feminine voice. Heiden looked over to the girl he knew was Makatsuchi to begin with. It's me. Please, it's me," she said with fear oozing from her tone. "Please, don't hurt me." She was clearly on the verge of hysterical tears. Heiden was still holding his sickle up above his head. He looked around the room at all of the hopeful faces. He then looked down at the kid with his head down who he was seconds away from butchering. What the hell? I already brought it up." With a disgusting sound of impalement, he split the kid's skull in half. The room fell quiet at the horrific act. Even after he got what he wanted, he wouldn't spare a child. Now, their brief moment of hope when Makatsuchi gave herself up was squashed. Heiden sighed as if the task was so taxing. Believe me, ya little shit. I did you a favor." He walked back over to the girl who was now regretting ever giving herself up as she cried vehemently on the ground, trying to scramble away. Heiden came up and squatted down in front of her. "Oh, stop your crying already, damn it," he muttered before putting her to sleep. With his handiwork complete, he stood up and looked around at the rest of the people who were either crying or dead silent, frozen in shock. He slung Makatsuchi over his shoulder and turned to leave. "Well, it's been a shitload of fun, but I've got to make my exit. You fucks have a nice day," he called out on his way out. The people were still shell-shocked by the events that just took place, but in a selfish way were glad they'd lived to see another day. "Hope you die," or so they thought. With a whizzing sound, the people looked up at the top of the cave to see paper tags that were seconds away from blowing. Their screams were silenced with a boom that Heiden could feel even in midair as he dropped off the side of the cliff with Makatsuchi slung over his shoulder. Kisame smirked as the sun disappeared. He looked over to Zabuza, who nodded his head. The two men jumped away, ready to begin their mission. Kisame shunshined into the very center of the village. He looked around at all of the stunned faces looking his way in both fear and amazement. Finishing his hand signs, he opened his mouth and a continuous stream of water came shooting out, filling up the area incredibly fast until the surrounding, unlucky, civilians were all drowning within an unnatural bubble of water. It was huge and seemed to envelop a few blocks. Kisame smirked as his form seemed to bulk into a more shark-like appearance. From within, he went through hand sign after hand sign, sending off random attacks that burst from the bubble of water that some of the civilians were drowning within. Water dragons, shark bombs, shock waves, they were all being thrown around the village in different directions, drawing the attention of more than a few shinobi. He watched as those outside of his bubble were trying to save some of the civilians within the area of battle, and those idiotic enough to jump in tried to save the drowning victims. Then, he was greeted by a few ANBU who seemed to believe they were proficient in fighting within water. He smirked and swam faster than they could keep up with, ripping them to shreds with ease. He went through hand signs again and sent more and more deadly jutsu, shooting from the sides of his bubble. A sick chuckle accompanying his destructive reign of terror. He swam up to the surface, seeing someone he was actually eager to battle. Shark skin in hand, he stared across at the Mizukage, holding his bulky blade in his hands as well. Kisame smirked and sunk back down. Break! Zabuza sliced through yet another guard as he rushed towards his destination. Just a while ago he watched the new Mizukage, a young blue-haired man with glasses, walk out the building giving instructions to protect her with your life, so he knew he was in the right place. He was disappointed with the skill of the shinobi he's run into thus far. Only one of them was able to put up a somewhat adequate fight that lasted all but 20 seconds. Rounding another corner, he dropped into a slide, avoiding the sword slash that was inches from taking his head off. He turned around and looked the young swordsman in the eyes. The young man was holding his shaking blade in Zabuza's face, trying to keep his composure. Zabuza slowly stepped forward until the man finally decided to try his luck. Zabuza pulled his giant blade up and blocked the strike with absolute ease. "You are unfit to be a swordsman," he said, slicing his body in half straight down the middle. With that finished, he turned and continued running, ignoring the tremors of the building as he threw his sword forward. It impaled whoever was on the other side of the wooden door with a grunt. Zabuza ran forward and kicked the door open, gripping the handle of his blade to pull it out. He flicked the blood off of it and ignored the now dead man who slumped down behind the door. He jumped, avoiding the slash from the man to the left of him. While in the air, he scouted the room. There were 3 remaining enemies and the chair of the desk was spinning, meaning someone jumped out of it. He used the hole in his sword to wrap around the neck of the man that tried to attack him. When he landed, he dropped down, avoiding the overhead slash from the man behind him. He yanked the man in his sword over top of him, causing the man who slashed at him to catch him. When he did, Zabuza had already kicked his sword through both of their bodies. Before he could collect his weapon, the last wannabe swordsman rushed him, swiping his blade wildly at him with a war cry. It was an extremely pitiful attempt at wielding a weapon of any kind. Zabuza grabbed his wrist and kicked his leg over the man's arm. He then brought the appendage back around his neck and put him in a sort of reverse arm bar. Then he dropped down to the ground, bringing him with him. The man's face was pressed to the ground beneath Zabuza's legs. With a jerk of his body, he broke the man's arm, causing him to loosen his grip on his sword. Zabuza rolled to his feet and grabbed the screaming man's sword, impaling his head to the floor. Silence enveloped the room as Zabuza sighed and plucked his bloodied weapon from the bodies of the two men laying lifeless on the floor. He leaned it up on his shoulder and followed the muffled breathing of fear he heard. With ease, he flipped the wooden desk over, revealing the frightened woman beneath. She tried to scramble away from him and Zabuza just stared at her, before stabbing his sword into the ground next to him. Jumping towards another roof, Ino planted another paper bomb before heading to another one to repeat the process. It was almost sundown and she had planted hundreds around the city. They were needed for her plan. When she was set up and ready, she headed back to the rendezvous with Pakora. "You ready?" Pakora asked her timidly, afraid she was still a bit touchy about their previous conversation that ended in a heated declaration from the masked blonde. "All set," she said with a smile and a thumbs up. "Let's have a blast." Pakora looked at her strangely but nodded nonetheless. There was but a sliver of sunlight remaining. "I'm going," Pakora said, jumping off the wall in the direction of her target. Ino didn't respond as she sat on the edge, swinging her feet to a tune in her head, watching the sunset. When it was time to act, she stood to her feet and stretched her body out. "Okay, time to make my love proud," she said, looking down at the village. Performing a few hand signs, she pulled her mask up slightly so that her soft lips were exposed. With a deathly innocent smooch to the air, a condensed ball of light shot out of her mouth in an arch that traveled high and far towards the center of the village. For a second, it seemed to just disappear within the city. Ino waited casually for the final product. Then, with a flash of light, an explosion erupted, followed by a very deafening boom that rocked the ground she was standing on. She cheered loudly at the destruction until she was spotted by a patrolling Chunin. She stopped her shouts of praise and pulled a scroll from her pouch. Unsealing its content, a sword appeared in her hands. She rushed the boy who was trying to form hand signs. Before he could finish, she threw her sword into the center of his chest. Rushing forward, she plucked it from his body before jumping and shooting off a fireball that was a fairly decent size at the village below. When it hit, she jumped from her high vantage point, avoiding the puppet that shot towards her. Looking for the assailant, she saw none other than Kankuro utilizing his personal puppet. Ino smirked beneath her mask and took off through the village, letting off more and more deadly attacks as she went along. Break! Pakora jumped through the window of the building she assumed the target to be in. Walking further in, she performed a few hand signs and 3 balls of flame surrounded her body as she walked. As she ran down the hall she was in, she could hear footsteps rushing down the adjacent path. She simply willed one of the balls forward and it cut the man off, slamming straight through his form. He fell to the ground looking as though he was drained of all of the moisture in his body. She picked the carcass up and quickly threw it into a nearby closet. She could hear multiple steps from above her, but assumed them to be soldiers based on her time here. As she continued running, she jumped up to the ceiling, avoiding the detection of a voice she was sure she knew. It was the Kazekage, Gaara. He was heading down the hall in the company of his apparent advisor, discussing the current attack. "How much damage has been done?" he asked urgently. The brown-haired man quickened his pace to keep up with the redhead. "The assailant has destroyed a very great chunk of the market district. There are a heap of civilian casualties and a few shinobi as well," he debriefed. "Kankuro-sama is currently giving chase," he finished as they rounded the corner. Pakora was impressed by her partner's destructive capabilities. She had assumed she'd be a bit more dainty in battle, maybe relying on speed rather than power to handle a fight. She actually doubted she had the ability to play the role of the distraction, but clearly her unease was misplaced. If the Kazekage was on his way, however, she'd have to do this quickly. Dropping back down to the floor, she ran down the hall at full speed and rounded the corner. At the end of this hall was a room reserved for important meetings that could not be discussed around prying eyes. The perfect place for the Kazekage to hide valuables. Before she reached the door, she threw a kunai with an explosive tag on the end of it. The door was blown open and within, still sitting in their seats, were the elderly council members. These were the same fuckers that tried to kill her years ago. Ignoring that fact, she had a mission to do. One of them saw her rush in from the smoke and immediately grew worried. No, wait, Paku dash. He stopped as she jumped over their table and blew the door behind them off its hinges. Within was a woman nursing a child. The men at the table stood to their feet seeing her intentions. She's after the Kazakage's nephew, one of them yelled. Pakora had no time for any sort of pleasantries as she reformed the balls of chakra around her. She sent one out and drained the woman who had set the child down to face her. The woman's drained body fell to the ground and she quickly rushed to the crib she had just laid the baby in. Picking him up, she turned around and sent another one of her balls into the room. She stepped to the side of the door and waited. The ball she sent into the room burst into a sort of mist that quickly drained the life of the 5 remaining men within. As soon as it did, she took off, staring down at the disgusting men on her way by. Rushing back down the hall, she busted out of the first window she saw. Covering the baby to protect it from any sort of injury, she jumped away from the building. As she ran along the top of the wall of the village, she looked in at all the damage that had been done. The city was in utter destruction. In the distance, she could see sand tendrils chasing after the masked blonde who was too quick and nimble for the Kazakage to catch. She created a clone and sent it that way to inform her that they were done and needed to escape. She didn't want to alert the Kazakage of the true purpose of this mission. She couldn't let him see the bundle for fear of him giving chase. Break! Pakora's clone reached the center of the commotion and threw an explosive kunai at the sand tendril coming down on the still recovering blonde. Ino looked up to see Pakora empty-handed. The green-haired woman just nodded at her and disappeared in a cloud of smoke. Understanding the message, Ino came to a stop in a crouch. Looking across at the sand-wielding man, she smirked beneath her mask. "This was fun, Kazakage-sama," she said in a cute tone that was eerily unsettling considering how many people she killed. Gaara looked absolutely furious as the sand seemed to just bubble along with his anger behind him. "Why have you done this?" he demanded. Ino just shrugged. "How about I tell you later?" she said, using her hand to gesture herself blowing a kiss to him. "You're not going anywhere," he said, bringing his sand up in a threatening way. Ino smiled and made a hand sign. "Oh, I think I am." Gaara's eyes grew as he was unsure if she was bluffing or not. "You've got a village to save." She simultaneously set off the tags she had placed all over the village before taking off. Gaara turned around to see all the explosions. He peered back over his shoulder, tearing himself apart on what to do. Should he go after her or save his people? Begrudgingly, he made his decision and flew towards anywhere he could hear people calling for help. He ordered every shinobi near him to assist in recovering the injured. Pakora waited on the other side of the wall until she heard the massive amounts of explosions. Ino came jumping down and began running with her, giggling in excitement. "Hee, we did it!" she cheered happily as they made their exit. Pakora remained cautious of the girl, but ran alongside her regardless. The 5 higher-ups who had all returned from a mission complete lounged around in the meeting room, talking about how great it felt to take action. It has been a week since their simultaneous attacks and they were still waiting on the ladies to return. Naruto was absent from the group, opting instead to sit on the throne overlooking the main room with a book in his face. He was planning the next move in his head. There was one more task to complete before they were ready. It would be the most taxing, of course, but the most satisfying to complete. Getting to a section in his book that made him think, he read the section out loud. War is but a mere stepping stone in the struggle of humanity. A struggle to survive, not only in the basic sense, but to survive in comfortability. Survive with pride. It made sense. Humanity is selfish, arrogantly driven by a need to have more than the next man. More power, more intelligence, more money, more land, more lovers. It was all just a pointless objective to blind everyone of the truth. That truth being, high love. "We're back," Ino's voice yelled out as she landed in the throne next to his. Naruto smirked beneath his mask and looked over to her. "Ah, at last," he said, putting his book away and standing up. He held his hand out for her to take, which she did gracefully. Did you retrieve the target? Yes. Well, no. Pakora did. I was the distraction, she said, hugging onto his arm. Naruto looked over to her. Were you now? He asked rhetorically, receiving a nod of her head against his arm. MHM. And love, my kiss of doom worked, she said excitedly. Naruto slowed his pace. I thought I told you. I don't like you using that, he said, holding onto her mask. You nearly killed yourself the last time you did. Ino rubbed his hand. I've got it down now, she said casually as she shrugged her shoulders. I can do it from up to 50 feet away now, she said with a nod. Naruto shrugged. Well, if you say so, he said nonchalantly as he began walking again. Ino rushed him and jumped on his back as she always did. Naruto cupped his hands beneath her knees and carried her to the meeting room as she once again played with his slicked back hair. Even though it was slicked back, it was extremely moist. It was as if he perpetually took showers. When they reached the meeting room, the others were still chatting away about their complete missions. They were all giddy about what was next, even though they of course expected a few months of inactivity. Well, that's what they expected. Be ready, Naruto said as he tilted his head so that the now maskless Ino could freely attack his neck. We leave for the final portion of preparation in an hour. With his piece said, he turned to leave. Final portion? Pakora asked for the group. Naruto turned back around and looked at them as if it were obvious. Konoha, of course. We're all going, he said nonchalantly before continuing down the hall. The 6 higher-ups all exchanged glances with each other. Heiden stood up with a chuckle. Oh, I love this fucking guy. The others didn't verbally agree, but by the way they all stood up with either a grin or a chuckle, they were very pleased as well. Break. Naruto and Ino walked down a hall that led to the containment area in which the 4 kidnapped victims remained within a cell. Well, the 3 that could provide for themselves. The Kazekage's nephew was being cared for by one of the women of the army a few rooms over. Naruto had set Ino down and they were just casually walking until they got to the front of the cell. When they peered inside, the 3 victims scrambled away from the bars. What do you want? Yelled the woman Zabuza and Kisame had taken from Kiri. Naruto just stared at her. Welcome, Rai-sama, he said pleasantly. You must be wondering why you lot are here, he said, pacing in front of their cell. Despite her outburst, she was still very much afraid and backed up to the wall. She even tried to block Naruto's view of the child, letting show her motherly instincts. I am horribly sorry, but you are here because of your fiancé. I need him to accept my invitation. And if I have you, he'll come running. Makatsuchi decided to question him next. Then why am I here? Her voice was timid, as she already knew the answer. Naruto just shrugged. From what I was told by Heiden, you are widely known to be the closest friend to the Tsuchikage, Karatsuchi, he said. At least that's what the informant told him. Makatsuchi remained silent after that, certain that lying would do her no good. Naruto just went back to pacing. What are you gonna do to us? Rai asked in fear as she pushed the little dark-skinned boy further behind her. Naruto tilted his head at her. Nothing, as I said before. You are only here as incentive for your fiancé's attendance. Rai began crying even more hysterically as she slid down the wall. In due time, Rai-sama. Until then, remain here. Shout out to this gentleman here if you need anything, he said, grabbing onto a random soldier who was passing by. The man looked absolutely star-stricken standing in front of their leader. Yua. Yes, sir, he yelled with a salute. Naruto patted his shoulder and he and Ino walked back. Break. A few minutes later and the group of deadly ninja stood within the field above their base. Now, Naruto said, turning to address them. The attack must happen now and we have to get there as soon as possible. It takes about 10 days total for a message to be sent from Suna to Konoha, meaning we have an estimated 3 days to beat it there, he said with a deadpan tone. Oh, we'll make that no problem, Deidara said, throwing out some clay. It expanded into a huge dragon, large enough to carry them all. Naruto nodded to him in apparent appreciation before continuing. The reason we are all going is because of Konoha's strength. He could see some of them were immediately offended and he defused their anger quickly. Not as a nation but individual shinobi-wise, they possess the most extensive listing within the bingo books. Everyone will be need to play the distraction other than Ino, who will retrieve the target. Gotcha, hun, Ino said from his side. As everyone climbed up on the clay creation, Naruto turned to them. We attack with no mercy. Cause as much damage as possible. Keep the attention on the main battlefield and off of the objective, he said, looking out towards the ground that grew smaller and smaller the higher they got. Then, on Deidara's command, they were zipping through the sky. Menma and Shikamaru stood on the roof of the Hokage tower looking out at the clear day. He was going over everything they discovered, hoping Shikamaru had a different viewpoint on the whole ordeal. Ino, huh? So she's alive, he said solemnly, thinking about his old teammate. Menma understood what he was going through on a much deeper level. It was his brother, his own flesh and blood. Even though in the past it didn't seem like it, they were a lot closer back before they started their training. It was the common infatuation that any kid would feel for his older sibling. Mito as well, but it was to a different extent with him. They were brothers. He could remember the days of climbing into Naruto's bed when he had a nightmare, or jumping on him and crushing his ribs to wake him up in the mornings. Those were much better times. The three Namikaze children were inseparable in those days. Crazy when he thought about it being his own selfishness to start training that caused the whole neglect thing to happen. If he had just waited until after they graduated the academy as they planned, then maybe his mother and father would have trained Naruto while they spent their time being children. But instead, all of their attention was focused onto him and Mito, leaving Naruto to fend for himself. For a while, in his Chunin days when they left on their training trip with Jiraiya and his mother, Menma wondered why it was Naruto was so forgiving of them. When he was younger, he wasn't worried about it. His young mind just focused on them returning to normal, and Naruto was a part of normal. By the time he made it to the academy, he had so much pride in his brother that he constantly boasted to everyone on how great he was. Of course, he was always overshadowed by Sasuke, whose brother was Itachi Uchiha. Regardless, on the trip out the village, he began to mature and understand the world a bit better. When he did, he thought back to those days in the past where they sometimes wouldn't see Naruto for days upon days, then weeks, then ever. It was the first time he truly understood the reason he sometimes found his mother crying alone every now and then. He understood what neglect was, and he couldn't imagine how it could affect someone. So, why was his brother so okay with it? Menma was certain that had it been him in that position, he wouldn't be that carefree about it. He saw him in a new light, even from miles away. To him, at the moment of that realization, Naruto was unbreakable. He was too strong both mentally and physically to let anyone or anything hold him down. Then, they received word, midway through their trip, that Naruto Namikaze has been arrested. Without hesitation, the trip was dropped and the four of them ran home demanding answers. It was a shocker to Menma when he returned to a cold-shouldered Sasuke who seemed to hate him for some reason. It wasn't until later did he learn the circumstances of the whole incident. Naruto had killed Itachi Uchiha by the manipulation of the snake Sannin. It was a heartbreaking story to even hear about, knowing how close the two were. It seemed as though Sasuke would never forgive him, but apparently after their fathers made up, Fugaku gave Sasuke a talk that set his misplaced anger to rest. He absolutely hated Naruto though, which Menma understood, of course. It was only a natural human emotion. Regardless of their friendship, he was determined to free his brother for an act that was not his fault. Point is, he knew exactly what Shikamaru was going through and then some. What do we do? Menma asked him, gripping the railing in front of him. Shikamaru sighed and looked around the village. Menma, if it comes down to it, we cannot spare them if they plan to continue their actions. Menma shut his eyes in defeat. Hearing it from Shikamaru just sealed the deal. Everyone had already suggested it to him so far. Now hearing it from the one person he knew could come up with a better solution just solidified what everyone else had already told him. He would have to face his brother the next time they met. If he wouldn't listen to him, then he would be forced to kill him. Do you think you can do it? He asked him, referring to Ino. Shikamaru leaned over the rail as well. Menma, I have a son. If Ino jeopardizes his safety in any way, shape, or form, I will not hesitate. It destroys my heart, but for my son, I will do what I have to. Menma rubbed his neck. This was already so much stress for just having taken office. He looked up to the cloudy sky in confusion. Why were there so many clouds? It was just completely clear a few minutes ago. As if an ominous warning, a faint clap of thunder from miles away shook the village. There was a storm coming. Ugh! I thought we were in for clear skies, Shikamaru said, looking up at the gray clouds looming above. Damn, weather is so unpredictable these days, he said. Yeah, Menma replied, trying to ignore that feeling welling up within the pit of his stomach. Naruto and the others were hidden above the clouds, preparing to attack the village below. Ino grabbed a kunai in her hand and jumped off the bird down into the forest they were gliding over. Deidara brought the clay bird back to the center of the village, awaiting the order. Naruto was mouthing down numbers slowly, as if he were following a clock. The others were already preparing their first attack. Deidara had 2 of his clay birds in his hands. Pakora manifested her chakra orbs. Zabuza and Kisame had their swords drawn. The masks on Kakuzu's back tore from his body and took their own forms, and Heiden was itching to leap from the bird and wreak havoc. Naruto went through hand signs and stuck his hand out. A Rasengan began forming above his palm before a number of things happened to it as it emitted a high-pitched screaming sound with blades of wind surrounding it. Then from the center of the orb, sparks of flames began spitting out before changing the color of the orb to a very bright white. He held it over the edge of the clay creature with the others watching in wonder. The wind around them twisting violently. Naruto just continued counting down quietly to himself. 6, 5, 4, 3. He went silent as he stuck his hand out more. Then, he casually turned his hand over, causing the deathly-looking ball of light to fall from his hand. The others watched it in curiosity at what it would do. The ball of chakra fell within the crowded market section of Konoha, with a few people looking at it in wonder. When it hit the ground, it seemed to melt into the ground momentarily before a deathly ground-shaking explosion encompassed the entire area. Silence followed it for more than a few blocks until the deafening sonic boom followed right behind it. The others watched on in amazement as that single jutsu took out block after block. Before they knew it, they were spotted and balls of fire were being sent their way. Go! Naruto said as everyone dove from the clay creature that spiraled towards the ground like a missile. While in their freefall towards the village, the group swerved around the projectile attacks coming from all directions. It would seem as though every ninja within the village was already attacking. Pakora sent one of her chakra orbs flying to the most densely packed area she could see. When it hit the ground, it exploded, causing the resulting mist to drain the unlucky individuals nearby. Heiden was using his sickle to slice through the attacks with the help of Zabuza. Kisame was absorbing everything that came within his vicinity, and Kakuzu was on the back of one of his black-masked creatures that was protecting him from anything that came too close. When they neared the ground, they grabbed onto whatever pole or slid off of any building to break their fall. Without question, they dispersed to split the troops apart. Heiden and Zabuza hurtled off towards the entrance of the village until they were attacked by 2 very well-known jonin. They split apart, avoiding the wind-enhanced kunai that would have impaled one of them. Rolling to their feet, before them were Kakashi Hatake and Asuma Sarutobi. Nay, Kakashi. Guess we'll take these 2, Asuma said, ashing his cigarette onto the floor. Kakashi had his sights set on Zabuza as he lifted his headband. I guess so, he said, drawing 2 kunai. Zabuza wasted no time in rushing him. Deidara zipped through the sky, throwing around his clay creatures until he was forced to jump, avoiding, surprisingly, another piece of flying art, this one created with paint. Turning around, he locked eyes with a pale man with a blank expression, eyeing him intently from a bird. His grin widened as he took off, zipping through the sky, throwing more creations out along the way. The pale man was forced to either save the people or attack him. Pakora landed on the ground and was immediately blown back by a gust of wind. She pulled a kunai while in midair, deflecting the massive barrage of weapons sent her way. When she landed, she saw none other than the Kazekage's sister standing next to a girl with 2 buns in her hair and 2 scrolls in her hands. Oh, it's you, Pakora said casually as if she wasn't threatened in the slightest. Pakora, Temari yelled, stepping forward with her fan at the ready. "Why have you come here?" she demanded. Pakora ignored her question and formed 2 more chakra orbs that circled her form. Temari stepped back to talk to Tenten. "Don't let those touch you. You'll die instantly." Tenten nodded and jumped back further. Figuring support was her role since Temari had knowledge on the enemy. Pakora rushed forward, dodging the wind-enhanced blades being flung in her direction. Kisame was using his shark skin to slice down any shinobi foolish enough to try and engage him, simultaneously eating the chakra that they used from the techniques they were sending out. Just as he was about to kill another man, he jumped back, avoiding the kick that destroyed the wall next to him. Looking at his next opponent, he stifled a laugh at his ridiculous appearance. He was clad in a green spandex suit with an idiotic bowl cut atop his head. "Hey, what the hell are you?" he asked, pointing his sword at him. Before he received an answer, he jumped back again, receiving a slight feeling of déjà vu when another one came crashing down, wearing the same getup but a few years younger. "Guy-sensei, let us fight to win and better ourselves while we are in the springtime of our youth," he yelled ridiculously. "Careful, Lee," said a new voice, this one coming from behind him. Turning around, Kisame was greeted to a member of the famed Hyuga clan. "This guy's no ordinary opponent," he said as the veins around his eyes began to bulge. "His chakra is unbelievable." "Lee," Guy called out to him with a serious expression. "Remain vigilant. For some reason, I'm getting the vibe that this guy is very dangerous. We will beat him together," he proclaimed with a thumbs up and a smile that was unnaturally bright. Kisame just watched the spectacle in confusion before readying his blade. Kakuzu walked casually alongside his masked blobs of thread as they destroyed everything in their path. He didn't have to do much, but he did reach out and kill individuals every now and then. He continued walking until he physically couldn't. He forced his eyes to look down at his feet to see his shadow was a lot longer than it should have been. He followed it to a young man who was crouched down with his fingers in a strange position. Standing next to him was a pudgier man with swirling patterns on his face, a Hyuga girl, a man on the back of a huge dog, and a kid releasing bugs from his body. "Eh," Shikamaru said with a sigh. "This one was easy enough. Hinata, put him to sleep." "Hi," she responded, dropping down into a taijutsu stance and activating her Byakugan. When she did, she gasped and looked to the ground. Before she could warn him, a hand thrusted from the ground in front of Shikamaru, grabbing his neck and slamming his face against the floor. Kakuzu retracted his hand from the hole in the floor next to him and began walking forward again. The group of shinobi readied themselves for a fight as his 5 masked blobs of thread shot forward. Pulling herself through the window, Ino ran down the hall of the Hokage building in search of her target. She had already checked 2 different places they could be, but came up empty-handed both times. This was the last location she could think of. Hearing footsteps, she dropped down into a slide and cut the shinobi running the other way at the kneecaps, dropping him instantly. With no intention of putting him out of his misery, she continued on. Rounding another corner, she saw a door at the very end of the hall with a light peeking through the bottom of the door. She ran full speed and kicked it open. Within was a room with nothing but a single table. But the light was on and no one was there. Ino grunted in frustration before turning to leave. Before she took a step, she heard something ever so slightly, like a thud upon a metal surface. Turning back, she looked around the room, wondering what it was. She walked further in and looked in every possible location there was to hide. But the room was empty. She was just about to leave when she noticed something unnatural. The chair was pushed too far away from the desk and she hadn't touched it. It wasn't at a distance that could have just been chalked up to someone leaving in a hurry. It was too far. She peeked under the desk again to notice a small fissure in the carpet. It was almost unnoticeable, but she saw it. Walking over, she pulled at the fissure until a good chunk of the carpet seemed to come up with it with ease. It was like a cutout that perfectly hid the cut when you laid it back into the spot. Pulling it more, there was a metallic door that obviously belonged to a bunker. Ino stared at it with a bit of a grin. She pulled the door open and dropped down into it. Looking around, she spotted what she assumed to be the target, laying in a carrier was the daughter of the Hokage. She chuckled a bit before throwing her hands up to the side, blocking the kick that came for her head. It was hard enough to kick her off to the side of the bunker in which she rolled away from, getting out of the way of the fist that came flying to her. Ino stood at the exit to the bunker, her old friend and rival standing protectively in front of her child. "Who the hell are you?" the pink-haired girl yelled, drawing a kunai in her hand. Ino smirked beneath her mask and swung her sword around. She chuckled, watching Sakura's poor stance. A few years out of training was very apparent already. "Sakura Namikaze," she mocked slowly. Sakura crouched lower with a will to protect her child. "Look, how about you just step aside before you get hurt, sweetie?" Sakura adjusted her grip on her kunai, realizing she'd have to fight for her son. The bunker was such a small place that she couldn't fight the way she usually did. She'd have to play defense to protect her daughter. Walking down the street, Naruto used his sword to easily cut through anyone who attacked him. He had so far decimated a group of Chunin, 3 ANBU agents, and a number of Jonin. He was fearlessly strolling through the village, killing anyone he saw. By now, he expected to have been at least engaged by someone more worthy like Kakashi or maybe Guy. Not a single sight of them anywhere. He reminisced his time here and also looked casually at the new scenery, well, whatever was still standing. There was much more than what he knew growing up. Pulling up his sword, he blocked the kunai headed to his face. Following behind it was an Uchiha police member with his Sharingan activated. He rushed Naruto with another kunai in hand. Most people would feel some type of urgency when faced against the legendary Jujutsu, but Naruto had experience in fighting someone who was known as one of its greatest users. He blocked the slash headed towards his face and slashed lazily towards the man's neck. As expected, the man leaned back to avoid it. When he did, a clone of Naruto sliced his head off with ease from behind him. He stared down at the head of the wide-eyed kid and stabbed both of his opened eyes, knowing full well the kind of vultures that preyed around Konoha. Continuing down the road, he was greeted to 2 more people. Deep in thought, he didn't even realize he had already killed them until he looked up and their blood was gushing out. The liquid sprayed out and covered the side of his mask. Naruto ignored it and continued on. Turning the corner, he was on the main road of Konoha, staring straight down the road at the big red building. Without warning, a kunai flew towards his face, stopping it before it impaled his eye hole. He realized immediately that it wasn't a regular kunai by its 3-pronged shape. With seemingly no reaction, he stuck his hand up, catching the fist of Menma, who had suddenly appeared in front of him. Menma was shocked and quickly jumped back. "Hokage," Naruto said, slowly walking towards him. The look Menma gave him told him that he knew who he was. Please don't do this." Naruto stopped a few yards away from him. "You've grown," he remarked casually, ignoring his plea. "Hokage now, huh?" Menma tightened his grip on the kunai in his hand. He looked across at his masked brother with a painful expression. Why are you doing this?" he yelled to him, demanding an answer. Naruto didn't react. Instead, he caught the throat of some random jonin who jumped from an alley next to him. Menma stuck his hand out as if telling him not to. Naruto could see his hand cocking back to throw the kunai. With no mercy or patience, he snapped the man's neck with ease. "No!" Menma yelled, throwing the kunai forward. Chapter 12. Pacing around the small metallic bunker, Ino stared at the ferocious-looking pink-haired woman standing in front of her objective, a bit of a smile gracing her unseen lips. She would make this fun on so many levels within the time limit she was given. Rolling her neck with a feminine sigh, she suddenly threw a kunai her way and rushed in behind it. Sakura knocked it out of the way with her own kunai and leaned back a bit to avoid the sword slash. Immediately, she had to parry the next slash as well before it took her head off. Caught in a deadlock, she looked into the dark eye holes of the woman's mask but saw nothing but darkness. Ino released her sword, allowing it to drop to the side of the bunker, and immediately went for a punch to her face. Before it connected, Sakura knocked it out the way and tried to slash at her with her kunai. Ino brought her knee up and hit the inside of Sakura's elbow, blocking her slash. Landing, she caught the fist that Sakura threw to counter. Sakura tried to slash again, but Ino used her elbow to block it again. Before she could counter, the masked assailant delivered 3 very quick and sharp strikes to her abdomen. She coughed up spittle and couldn't avoid the kick that smashed into the side of her face, sending her to the side of the bunker. Ino strolled over to her and stood over her with a dominant aura, watching her try to scramble back to her feet. "You're not as strong as they say you are, huh?" she asked her in a mocking way. Sakura made it back to her feet and threw a few punches that were all blocked with ease. Ino caught her last hit and twisted her arm. Before she could break it, Sakura flipped over her and kicked her in the back, sending her into the wall. Before she could turn around, Sakura had her pinned. "What do you want?" she demanded, feeling as though she had the upper hand. She pushed her forearm up against the back of her neck. Ino only giggled at her laughable attempt of a threat. She pushed off of the wall just enough to slip underneath Sakura's hold. She rolled away, delivering a sharp kick to her knee. Sakura yelped in pain and limped back towards the carriage to protect Samire. She began healing the injured knee while keeping a sharp eye on the masked woman. Ino watched her silently. "Who are you?" Sakura asked again in desperation. There was a very disturbing feeling she got from fighting this woman. She couldn't describe it. It was familiar in a sense, as if she knew her. The hair gave her a thought that she just wouldn't even dare consider. Ino giggled, knowing for a fact Sakura had a feeling it was her anyways. She brought her hand up and covered the mouth of her mask. Gripping it gently, she slowly pushed up on it, revealing the face Sakura was praying she'd see again one day. "Not anymore. Ino!" she yelled in shock. Ino giggled and placed her hands on her hips with a very twisted closed-eyes smile on her face. "Hey!" she said cheeringly. "What the hell are you doing?" Sakura yelled. She couldn't understand. Ino, as casual as ever, gave her an answer. "Well, I'm here to get your child." "Duh." Sakura's eyes squinted threateningly. "Why?" Ino tilted her head to the side and gave her a condescending smile. "Well, because my honey needs her for a special project," she said with a nod. Sakura's face scrunched up in confusion. Ino understood the unasked question and answered before she could speak. "Oh, you don't need to know his name. Just know he's a brilliant man and he's just here to help." Sakura stepped back closer to Samire, raising her fists defensively. "I don't care who it is, you're not taking her." Ino raised an eyebrow at that. "Oh, come on, billboard brow. You know you're no longer a match," she mocked. "Especially not in this conveniently tight space we're in. What are you good for other than destructive punches? You really want to risk tearing this bunker up and endangering your own child?" Sakura's head and guard slowly lowered at the mental bombardment of words. She had neglected her training for the sake of motherhood. Over a year of no combat has dulled her skill immensely. Now she wasn't even able to properly protect her own daughter. Raising her guard with a fire in her eyes, she readied herself for a battle to the death. Because that was where she was willing to take this. Ino watched her ready herself once again. Figuring she couldn't keep this going on for too much longer, she raised her fists as well. Before she left, she had to prove the point that she was far stronger than she was. She had been on the raw end of the deal with this woman for far too long. Sakura got the training at one point and she blew it with her lack of focus. Love can make you weak, but it could also make you strong. Ino was about to show her what the latter looked like. Sakura rushed forward and threw a wild haymaker at the blonde. Ino ducked the strike and jabbed her twice below her bicep. Sakura ignored the little hits and swung her other arm. Ino rolled out of the way and rushed her again. Jumping up, she used her left knee to block her blind right hook and drove her right one through her chin. Sakura tumbled to the ground face first. Ino waited for her to get back to her feet. When she did, she rushed the blonde again with no hesitation and a fire in her eyes that had to be felt. Flipping back, Naruto avoided the Rasengan that destroyed the spot he was previously standing at. He landed in a crouch on the side of a building, staring down at Menma, who shot towards him with rage in his eyes. Naruto waited for him to reach him before cutting the chakra to his feet and falling towards him. Menma skidded to a halt, seeing Naruto shoot towards him like a bullet. He leaned back, causing the red head to fly past him. Turning around, he leapt from the side of the building, avoiding the ball of flames that destroyed the entire wall. While in the air, he noticed another one heading his way. Throwing his kunai through the flames, He teleported to it and had to pull his head back before Naruto's knee caught his chin. In his outstretched position, he couldn't avoid the heel coming down towards his face. It smashed into his face, sending him shooting head first into the ground below. Kicking up off the ground, Menma turned and was met with a soaring Naruto who smashed brutally into the side of his body, kicking him into the shop behind him. Naruto rushed in and grabbed a chunk of debris that was falling from the top of the wall. He threw it at the blonde Kage who was trying to pull himself out of the rubble he was thrusted into. Menma dodged it and rolled away before Naruto's heel struck his chest. Before Naruto could correct his footing, Menma tackled him into the table behind him. Hitting his back on the edge, he caught his balance and flipped Menma over him. Jumping up, he drop-kicked the table back to Menma who had just landed. The table smashed into his body, briefly pinning him to the wall. Naruto ran up right behind and kicked both the table and Menma through wall and back onto the street. Naruto jumped out and avoided the paper-bombed kunai that shot into the shop. He rolled forward, avoiding the flying debris from behind him. Rolling back to his feet, he quickly hit his back again, before Menma's knee connected with his masked face. He kicked himself up and jumped the follow-up leg sweep. Menma took advantage of his suspended form and hit him in the side, sending him tumbling towards the ground. Naruto rolled out of his tumble and continued running up the side of the building with Menma chasing him. Before he reached the top, he stuck his hand out, catching the wrist of a sword-wielding shinobi who tried to catch him off guard. He pulled the guy from the top of the roof and jumped away. While in the air, he kneed him in the face, causing him to release his grip on his sword. Before they hit the ground, Naruto had already decapitated him and kicked the head at the still chasing Menma. Menma dodged the disturbing projectile and continued with a rage in his eyes. He pulled two of his kunai on the way and threw one at his opponent. Naruto threw his own kunai, stopping it between the two as he rushed forward as well. Before Menma made it to him, he was tripped up by a hand popping out of the ground. He rolled until he was on his back. He quickly pushed his feet up, kicking the wrists of Naruto who was falling towards him with the sword ready to execute him. He brought his leg back and delivered a strike to his knee, dropping him down. He quickly disarmed him and pulled one of his arms down over his shoulder while he wrapped his legs around his neck, putting him in a triangle hold. He pulled as hard as he could, trying to black him out, but Naruto picked him up and slammed him on the ground, cracking the earth beneath him. Menma's grip loosened just enough for Naruto to free himself. When he did, he picked him up by the collar of his cloak and swung him around until he let go, throwing his limp body into the side of the building behind him. Menma stood up painfully, wiping the blood that dripped from his mouth. Naruto just stood in his spot menacingly, staring at the downed form of his little brother. Menma stood to his feet and rushed again. Naruto waited for him to reach him, and when he did, he delivered a brutal kick to his chest, stopping his charge. Menma staggered back in pain for a second before he was kneed in the face, audibly cracking his nose. With no time to recover, he flipped away and landed on the side of a building, clutching his face in pain. Before he could react, another Naruto kicked the wall from within, sending him flying through the air. He set his eyes on landing on the building across the street, but before he could make it, he felt two hands clasp down on his ankles. Naruto began spinning violently through the air to pick up momentum. When at the peak of his speed, he released his grip, sending the blonde crashing painfully into the ground. When Menma landed, he flipped over and barrel rolled out the way before Naruto crushed his body as he landed in a crouch. Standing back to his feet, he rushed towards him and pulled two of his kunai. He threw them both to either side of the redhead and went through hand signs. The two blades became many and lodged into the ground around the waiting redhead. Menma grew agitated at the seemingly undeterred manner of his older brother. He showed him absolutely no respect, even now given his position. Naruto stood stock still awaiting Menma's next move. Menma rolled his shoulder out, staring at his masked brother intensely, planning out what he wanted to do. Throwing another kunai down next to his own feet, he disappeared. Suddenly the area around Naruto lit up in multiple flashes of yellow in an attempt to blind him. Naruto didn't even react. He just stood in the center of the field of kunai. As if a practiced routine, he threw his hand up, blocking Menma's right hook with ease. Menma disappeared again and the blob of flashes continued. Naruto ducked, avoiding the kick to the back of his head before Menma continued. With a sigh, Naruto turned around and stuck his hand out, somehow grabbing the neck of his younger brother as he flashed to the kunai beneath his dangling feet. "Ah, Otuto," he mocked from behind his mask. "It's like you don't even truly understand the jutsu," he said casually. "Maybe the yellow flash himself can enlighten you a bit." He released his grip on his neck, letting him fall before he flashed away. He landed on his butt at the kunai he placed away from the redhead who didn't seem to be looking at him. Tracing his eyes, his father stood a few feet away staring at Naruto. "Tsunade, get back." Minato looked over to him for a second before looking back towards Naruto. "Naruto." The redhead remained unfazed, staring off against two of the Hokage. "Why have you done this?" He remained silent. "What was your plan?" Naruto scoffed. "Do I look like a guy with a plan?" he asked ominously. Menma stood to his feet and positioned himself next to his father. The two of them stared over to the other male of their family with steely resolves. "We will not allow you to destroy the village," Menma called out with finality in his voice. "Destroy the village?" Naruto asked casually. "Is that what you believe I was doing?" Menma and Minato sunk into their stances, ready for anything. Naruto looked up to the sky and saw something that seemed to catch his eye. "Well, in any case, I'm done here." He turned around and began walking away. Menma stepped up in haste. "Wait, after all of this, you think we're gonna let you walk away?" he yelled incredulously. Naruto just continued walking as if he couldn't hear him. "Hey, try and impede my gracious retreat and I can promise more damage will befall the village," he called out over his shoulder. "Risk it if you wish." Menma readied his kunai before Minato grabbed onto his elbow. Menma turned to him in question. Minato just shook his head sadly. "We can't beat him here. It'll cause too much damage." Menma clenched his teeth and stared at Naruto's retreating form. "I don't like how easily he's giving up. Go check on Sakura." Menma's eyes shot open and he focused his chakra. He couldn't sense her seal. Before he could voice his concern, Minato calmed him. "The bunker blocks the signal of the Heration to avoid all detection." Menma nodded and took off. Naruto, now on the back of Deidara's clay bird, did not care to wait and call out to the others down below on his way out. They just joined as he and Deidara passed low enough for them to jump on. Soon, everyone was on board aside from Zabuza, who had Kakashi's Raikiri pierced through his chest. Naruto spared him but a slight glance before ordering Deidara to continue on. "Ha ha!" Heiden chuckled, swinging his sickle around. "That was fucking amazing. I killed so many of those rat fuckers." Kisame chuckled. "Heh, what's your count?" he asked him with his and Zabuza's sword slung across his shoulder. "Too fucking many," Heiden replied with a grin. "Where we going next, oh great leader?" he asked in excitement. Naruto stared over the side of the bird, looking through the trees until he spotted Ino. "We're going to greet an old friend," he said ominously. Pakora looked at him in confusion. "What, right now?" she asked. "You don't allow rest, do you?" Deidara, Heiden, and Kisame chuckled at her as they continued on the way. Kakuzu didn't seem to care much and Naruto ignored it as well. They swooped down and scooped up Ino before shooting off away from the hidden leaf. By the time they realized the Hokage's daughter was gone, they'd be too far to catch. 3 days later, Menma sat in the chair next to his wife's hospital bed. He was staring at her bandaged form, trying to think up their next move of action. Naruto attacked the village, tried to kill him, and has taken the most important thing in his life. Before, he had in his mind the thought of trying to speak with him and talk him out of whatever it was he was planning. Now, there was nothing but a will to kill him. Never before would he have thought that he'd have a will to kill his own brother. It would have never crossed his mind, but now it wouldn't leave it. With the absence of their most loved family member, the whole family had made up their minds, even his mother. There was still a heaviness in his heart that was praying for another way, but when his own daughter was at stake, there was no other way. No matter how sure he was in his own abilities, he knew for a fact he couldn't beat Naruto. That last battle told him as much. Maybe had he used the Kyuubi he could have forced him to fight seriously, but for fear of losing control, he held back to his strongest technique, which he just recently found out was useless against another user. Naruto could have ended him at any time, and it wasn't until the end of the battle did he realize that. It's like his intention was to humble him. It would seem that this endeavor of ending this was not Konoha's own responsibility anymore. He received 3 letters in the past 3 days. From Kumo, Kiri, and Suna, all describing their attack and the theft of their Kage's loved ones. Menma had no idea what Naruto could be planning, but he felt as though it was falling into place. Maybe he was planning on inciting a war? It held all of the components of such a task, but that would be quite obvious for someone as intelligent as Naruto. Maybe it was the simplicity of the objective that made him want to do it? Possibly, but it was too risky to assume anything. All he knew was that every living shinobi connected to a village was calling for his head. Well, aside from IWA, as far as he knew. A knock broke the silence, and before he could even answer, 2 people marched into the room. "Is it true?" asked Mito with a very heated and desperate look in her eyes. Sasuke stood behind her, just as alert. Menma sighed and stood to his feet. He walked towards the window and stared out at the destroyed village. "He took Sumair-chan," he said, letting that ring in the air for a few seconds. Mito held her own stomach as she looked down to Sakura, who was still out cold. She couldn't even imagine. "Well, what the hell are we gonna do?" she asked him urgently. Menma spun around. "We are not going to do anything," he said firmly, drawing attention to we. "Why aren't you out there trying to find her? Why haven't you just teleported to her?" She began again, feeling her anger slowly rising. Menma shook his head. "Naruto has tampered with her seal. We can't feel the pull," he said in disappointment. "We've tried everything, so, what, we just sit around and do nothing?" Mito asked, taking a seat next to Sakura and grabbing onto her cold hand. What if he kills her?" Menma's focus was on the white blanket, contemplating her words. He wouldn't do that, he tried to tell himself. "Menma," Sasuke said, for the first time making his presence known. "Look around you. Look at how many people he's killed. Are you still trying to defend that monster?" "No, I'm just..." He couldn't find the words. "We'll find her." He got out, staring out the window once again, his eyes staring out to the horizon. "We will." All 3 of them were alerted by the sound of very urgent footsteps charging down the hall. The door was flung open and the gate guard burst through. "Hokage-sama, we've received another note." Menma walked over to him. "Is it IWA?" he asked. The man looked down at the note and shook his head. Menma took it from his hands, and a look of shock and hope lit his face, all tied together with an underlining of worry. "What is it?" Sasuke asked, walking towards him. Menma turned around, reading the message a few times over before reading it aloud. "Note, Dear Hokage, it is to my greatest pleasure that I offer you this invitation to an event that may allow you to retrieve a certain prize I have taken from your village. Since it is a prize, you must follow the rules of the game I have set up down to the T. Any ulterior actions will be taken as an immediate forfeit and your prize is eliminated. The rules of this game are simple. You must meet me at the location marked on the back of the scroll in 3 days. Bring with you nothing but yourself, any Kage of your village still living, your strongest jonin, and 1 other individual of your choice. Optional. Arm yourself for a battle. The rest of the instructions will be given in person among your arrival. I pray you heed my warning and stick to the rules. My patience is far from what it used to be. No late entries will be accepted. Failure to comply with the rules, failure to attend, and failure to cooperate throughout with result in forfeit. Good day, Otudo." Menma clinched the scroll shut and stared at the ground beneath his feet. What was this? Was it some kind of game to him? He snapped his fingers and an ANBU dropped from the shadows of the room, kneeling before him. "Bring my father and Kakashi," he said with finality. Sasuke looked at him in question. "I'm going," he said as if he were demanding it. Menma shook his head and walked towards the window. No, I need you here." "Menma, he's the strongest jonin? Who's stronger than him?" Mito asked, defending him. "Kakashi is." He responded quickly. I am sorry, Sasuke, but you are not match for Naruto. I don't even think I am. Sasuke stepped around Mito and made his way over to the blonde Kage. We can take him together. You know we are strongest together. Menma sighed and rubbed his head. Yeah, but you have a personal vendetta that will cloud your judgment. I can't take you, Sasuke. I need you here with Mito. Here with Mito? I'm going too, she yelled in anger, as if him even suggesting she wasn't was some kind of insult. Menma spun around. Are you kidding? Mito, you're pregnant. You're not going anywhere. I don't have to fight him. I could just talk to him. Menma just stared at her. She didn't yet understand. Mito, he's not the same anymore. There will be no talking to him. His eyes held a finality to them that Mito had never seen before. He took some ire. So you really want to kill him? She asked. You don't? That's your niece. He yelled back at her. You don't understand yet, because you haven't had your child. He's right, came a new voice. Walking into the room, Minato held the hand of Kushina. Mito, I understand how you feel. We all do. Kushina couldn't even make eye contact with anyone in the room. Naruto has done the unforgivable. He's attacked our home and taken some ire. We cannot allow him to do any more damage. Mito looked around at all of them. Everyone else seemed so content with the decision. Then, I'd rather not go anyway, she said, leaning back into Sasuke's chest. I am taking Kakashi and Tsunade. Menma said. I don't know what he has planned, but it can't be good. What about the special guest? Sasuke asked, piquing Kushina's interest. Menma shook his head. It says it's optional. I don't think it's Nisi's dash. I'm going. Kushina interrupted, shocking everyone. Menma stared at her, shaking her head as if he were preparing to refuse. Menma, please. Minato was looking at her with remorse. Kushina, you can't save him. That's not why I want to go, she quickly said. Minato, this is our fault. This is all our fault and we have to be the ones to fix it. Minato didn't reply as he refused to dispute her statement. He very much agreed with her, but he didn't want to let her know it was fine to blame herself. Ka-san, Menma said, getting their attention. You wouldn't stand a chance. I'm sorry for saying it, but Naruto is in a class of his own. And by the way she handled Sakura, Ino is far stronger than she was back then as well. I am not weak, Menma, she said in a threatening way. I can handle myself. Menma sighed in frustration and looked over to Minato, visually telling him he would leave the decision to him. Minato looked over to Kushina and noticed that look in her eyes. It was a look he hadn't seen in a while. He slowly nodded and turned back towards Menma. Menma got the message and finally relented. Okay, Ka-san, he said, nodding towards her. Just be careful. Kushina shook her head in agreement, a fire in her eyes blazing with determination. 2 days later, an unnaturally placed earthen platform jutted out from the raging waters, far from the shore they had set out from. Naruto watched from the front of the boat as 5 other smaller platforms jut out from the front of the platform, and on the other side, a rectangular platform rose, this one with 2 throne-like seats placed on it. The creator of the construct, an orange-haired man with a weird series of markings on his face. Will that be all, Leader Sama? Naruto stepped forward. Yes, that is fine. You go, he said, jumping from the boat and onto the side of the rectangular formation. The other occupants of the boat headed up as well. They walked up to the respective platforms and began writing some kind of seals on the edges of the platform. Naruto and Ino sat on the thrones casually watching the others at work. Ino was holding Samire in her arms, rocking her to sleep. She looked over to Naruto, who was now reading another book. In truth, worries clogged her mind. With 5 Kage now pining for their heads, she couldn't see Naruto's plan ending with them walking away in victory, and failure in this case meant death. Was this some kind of suicide mission? It made sense when she thought about it. She knew Naruto was not a big fan of life, and he admitted to her that he was not suicidal. Maybe, subliminally, this was some kind of plan to make his death a lot more likely. It wasn't an uncommon tactic among the people with his level of psychosis. Hey, babe, she called out to him, turning back to Samire to seem nonchalant. Naruto looked towards her in question. What's the plan? Naruto just stared at her for a second. I told you, doll face. It's a surprise. Ino wasn't content with that answer. It doesn't feel like whatever this is gonna work, or like we'll even survive. Naruto turned back to the people working on the seals. Ino, death cannot be a factor when proving a theory such as this. What theory? She asked, finally looking over to him. Naruto dropped his book and looked out in the distance in thought. Well, it is far from pointless. I'll tell you that much. With that answer, he stuck his nose back in the book. Ino got the hint he was finished talking of the matter. She didn't want to push for fear of him thinking she was beginning to question his plan. Instead, she went back to playing with some ire. Naruto read a line in the book over and over. His new piece of literature was something he was given from one of his soldiers. It was a book that delved much deeper into the concept of conflict and the theory of chaos and order. What was strange about the book was the fact that it held no author. By the way it was written, he'd have thought he had written it himself based on thoughts he had yet to conjure. The wording of the book suggested a much darker understanding of the things in this world we view as precious. It was written in a nihilistic tone, of course, but the words were undisputable. It essentially boiled down to ramblings about the classic tale of the benevolent king and the revolting band of misfits. What was different was that there was no clear protagonist. Unlike most books, the line of good and evil was so diluted it was almost non-existent, leaving the decision of who to follow up to the reader. Strangely, however, the antagonist was clear, but there was no protagonist. For Naruto, it brought forth the realization that there was no impartiality between making either connection. A crowd was quick to point out an individual as evil when their ideals didn't exactly match up. Yet, when it came to picking a hero, no one could decide. It brought him to the realization that this entire scenario directly displayed that he was the clear antagonist, the undeniable evil that stained this world with his existence, no matter what his reasonings were. He was no hero, not even for the people that followed him. He was simply someone who was willing to tilt the scale that balanced the peace with the chaos, and they craved that. In truth, they were all vultures that he refused to empathize with. They had their own vendettas and hatreds with this world, but were too afraid to stand above the crowd and deliver the first blow. The heroes were of course the Kage, who so expertly had their people clinging to their feet in prayer, treating them like gods. It sickened him in a way to see a man bow at another man's feet so willingly. It was disgraceful for many reasons. He couldn't grasp the concept of it, even though he himself had done the same thing for most of his adolescence. The book described it as not a hierarchy of power, but a hierarchy of fearlessness. In other words, a man will bow to a man who fears less than him or appears to. A man who is willing to draw the attention of death and not care. These Kage were ruling as false kings, yet they didn't know the meaning of such a position and how rotten it truly was. Especially Menma, and it irked him so. His own family seeping into such a vindictive cycle. He refused to stand for it. Standing to his feet, he watched all of the seal users had finished their tasks and were standing on the middle of the battle platform, chatting amongst each other, waiting for his orders. Seeing his movement, the crowd quieted almost instantly. Naruto stood at the edge of the long rectangular platform and eyed their work from a distance. Very good job. You are all free to take your leave. The men all nodded and jumped back down to the boats awaiting them down below. Naruto jumped down to the arena platform and inspected the seal personally, changing things as he saw fit. When he finished, he jumped to each of the 5 other platforms and did the same thing. By the time he had finished, the day was coming to an end. He jumped back up to the throne pillar and retook his place next to Ino, who had her body slung out across the armrests of her throne, feeding some ire through a baby bottle. Everything good? She asked him, kicking her shoes off and resting her feet on Naruto's armrest as he sat down. Naruto nodded and sighed. Yeah. Now we wait. Ino looked up and smiled. Not for long. Looks like our cargo is here. Naruto traced her eyes and looked up to see Deidara's clay dragon approaching, carrying the bound and gagged forms of each of the prizes. Naruto stood to his feet and directed Deidara in where to place them. He had them all spaced out evenly along the rectangular platform in front of their thrones, each of them chained down to the ground beneath them, facing the arena platform. Well, all but the one that was too young to even walk. They were lined up based on their village. To Naruto's far left was the son of the Hokage, with a chain around his neck connected to the ground. The next slot held the Tsuchikige's childhood friend. The third slot, which was directly in front of Ino and him, was left blank. The fourth slot held the Kazekage's nephew resting within his crib. The final slot had the Mizukige's fiancée slouched over on her knees with rope tightly securing her arms behind her back. Step by step, Naruto went to each of the different slots and went through hand signs. He slammed his hands upon the ground behind them, causing their specific area to light up briefly before moving on to the next one. When he finished all of that, he retook his seat and sat with Ino, waiting for the fruition of this confusing plan to play out. A play he wasn't afraid to admit was a borrowed experiment. And so, they waited. The next day, Menma, Kushina, Minato, and Kakashi navigated the waters towards the coordinates listed on the back of their scroll, the silver-haired Jonin steering their boat. Everyone was fully armed and prepared for war. That's what it felt like at that moment, like they were heading into war. Every wave that smacked into the side of their boat felt like a distant heartbeat that increased with the tension in the air. Nobody was talking, which increased the eeriness of the situation. Menma sat against the side of the boat, staring out into the foggy-looking waters. Fear was gripping his heart and his mind ran wild with thoughts. What if this was some kind of trap? He was sure it wasn't by how honorable Naruto seemed to be even considering his actions. It would be the perfect opportunity for an ambush, and that is exactly what he was expecting. He was really trying to clear his head so that his judgment wasn't clouded during the battle. Out of the four of them on the boat, he was the only one that has never experienced war. Everyone else seemed so calm or at the least composed about the situation. It made sense considering their history with events of this magnitude, but a piece of him wanted to argue that they just truly didn't understand the threat that was his brother. He himself had no idea how monstrously strong Naruto was until their last battle. Had his father not shown up when he did, Naruto would have killed him. They did not understand the magnitude of his strength yet. Of course, with their own many accomplishments, they had confidence in their own abilities, but this was something else. Something much more overbearing than he was willing to admit. That realization came to him during their fight. Naruto did much more than just handle him, he did it with ease. It was the first time he felt humbled in years. When he could finally match his father in a battle, a man who was marked as a flea-on-sight shinobi in the bingo books, he figured he was on par with anyone he came up against. Well, this was a very different level altogether. Finally, his eyes caught sight of a set of rock formations with boats surrounding the bottom. It would seem that they were the last to arrive, which was strange considering the sun hadn't even risen yet. Staring up, they tried to get a feel for how high it was, but couldn't see past the mist. They pulled up next to the smaller pillar that held the symbol of Konoha on its side. The four of them nodded to each other and jumped up to the side of the platform and began running up. When they finally made it to the top, they were too late to hear the protests of the others and a barrier shot up around them. They looked around to see the other Kage and their guests all bickering to themselves. Directly in front of them, the arena platform remained barren, and further away, the platform containing the prizes. Minato, Kushina, and Kakashi stared at Naruto, who didn't seem to notice them at all as his book was still plastered in his face. Menma stared at the blonde who was holding his daughter in her arms. "Hokage!" yelled a feminine voice off to their far right. "Nice of you to finally show up." Menma finally tore his gaze away from his daughter and looked over to the platform right next to them, holding the Tsuchikage who had addressed him. "Tsuchikage-sama," he greeted with a nod. "Maybe now we'll start this crap," said a dry, lazy voice on the other side of her. Menma looked past her and nodded to Darui, the Hokage. He then turned the other way and greeted the Kazekage Gaara, who was to his right, and Chojuro, the Mizukage, on the end. "So, any idea what we're in for?" he asked them all. "No. The piece of shit hasn't said a word since we got here," yelled the Tsuchikage, looking up to the higher platform. "As soon as I get out of this, I'm killing him. Then I guess this is just a race to see who can get to him first," the monotonous voice of the Kazekage replied. Menma just stared up at Naruto, wondering what it was he planned to do. He had everyone here. It seemed like everything was set up, so what was he waiting on? "Hey!" he yelled up, thinking maybe he just didn't notice them yet. Don't waste your breath. He won't respond. Chojuro informed him. Minato stepped up next to him. Tusan, I can't feel her pull. He informed him. I know, the blonde man said. Neither can I. He must be disrupting it somehow, even from such a short distance. What do you think about this seal? He asked him, examining its unique green-tinted glow. Minato just shook his head. I haven't seen anything like it in a long time, he said, running a finger over it, noting how solid it felt. You can't do anything about it? He asked hopefully. Minato seemed a bit iffy about it. I don't think I can risk it. Knowing Naruto, it wouldn't be as easy as tampering with its writing, which isn't even visible. We should have planted kunai on the boat. Menma nodded his head in agreement. Make sure Kasan is holding up okay, he said as Minato nodded and stepped back to Kushina. Kakashi walked up next, looking much more tense than he's ever seen him. So what's the plan? He asked him lowly, not wanting to be heard by the others. We just wait. Menma shrugged his shoulders. Seems like we don't have a choice. Kakashi nodded and fell into silence. For the next 20 to 30 minutes, the groups of shinobi all fell into silence awaiting whatever was to come. Ino played with Samaire, trying to make her laugh. She looked over to Naruto, wondering what he was waiting on. She got her answer when he finally looked away from his book and out to the sea. She giggled. Is it so important to wait on the sun? She asked. Naruto shrugged, still looking at his book. Gives them time to plan, he replied with amusement in his tone. Ino nodded and went back to playing with Samaire. Naruto continued reading his book, every now and then peeking over to the horizon, just waiting for the very first glimpse of light. Sometime soon, the prizes began waking up, garnering the attention of their respective parties. Naruto watched all of their interactions in interest. It was a few minutes of very dramatic eye contact and whispered words of reassurance. When the time allowed it, there was also planning among the Kage for ways they could take him down. It was laughable watching them seemingly form these sudden alliances, and it brought truth, the saying, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." Friendship among individuals who believed they were the main protagonist was such a fickle thing. It wouldn't last much longer than he wanted it to. Looking up to the horizon again, there was a sliver of sunlight. He grinned beneath his mask and snapped his book shut. Everyone turned their attention to him as he stood to his feet. He began pacing behind the prizes, ominously drawing their attention to their incentives. He still had yet to say anything, but he was walking as if this was the beginning. Finally, he stopped on the middle section originally reserved for his niece and stared out at the Kage and their parties. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you. Your being here means you have accepted the rules and regulations of my game. That being said, let's have some fun.